Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into a question that's colder than your ex's voicemail and older than any furnace. How did Native Americans actually survive deadly winters without modern insulation, down jackets, or DoorDash? Yeah, you probably won't survive this, just saying, but they did. And not only did they survive, they did it with skill, grace, and honestly, some design choices that would put your rustic Airbnb to shame. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. That's the rule. No pressure, just vibes. Also, let me know in the comments, what city are you watching from? And what time is it right now where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel it first as a sting at the tip of your nose, then the dry air rasps across your cheeks, and snowflakes whisper down like secrets from the sky. The wind is rising, sharp and hungry, and you, walking across this unforgiving plain, starts to realise how big the world really is when it doesn't care if you make it through the night. There's no heated car to climb into, no emergency blanket stashed in a closet, no thermostat blinking obediently on a beige wall. There's just you, your breath curling into the growing dark and the sound of your own heartbeat reminding you that staying warm isn't optional, it's survival. But imagine this, you're not alone. You're surrounded by a band of people who've lived on this land for centuries, and they've seen winters far worse than this one. And somehow, when the snow piles higher than your shoulders and the wind tries to flay your face off, they're fine. Toasty even. Laughing over roasted roots and smoked meat inside something that doesn't even look that high-tech. What is it? A dome of dirt? A cone of hides? A pit in the ground with steam rising from a vent? Welcome to Indigenous North America before thermostats. It's not a monolith, it's a vast landscape from the Arctic down to the deserts, each nation with its own ingenious answer to the same ancient question, how do we not die when it gets stupid cold? Tonight you'll walk through thick snowdrifts in moccasins so well made you barely notice the cold. You'll duck through flaps of tanned hide, squeeze through narrow passageways, and descend into warm, smoky spaces that smell like cedar and bear grease. You'll feel the sudden hush that happens when the wind is left outside, and inside, the glow of embers, the quiet chatter, the weight of many winters survived. The thing is, there's no single blueprint. You won't find an IKEA-style manual for Indigenous Winter Shelter Model 387 Snowstorm Proof. Instead, every shelter you visit on this journey is a perfect response to a specific land, a specific people, and centuries of trial, error, and communal knowledge. But they all have something in common. They're warm. Not barely tolerable warm, but actually you might start sweating a little. You might take off a few layers. You might want to stay for dinner. You start with the wind howling across the central plains. It's late November, way before the modern holiday season, but after the buffalo have grown thick winter coats. You watch a group of people, Hidatsa, Mandan, Arikara, busy around what looks like a small hill. But it's not a hill. It's a home, and not just one, dozens of them. Earth lodges, dome-shaped and wide, with smoke curling from the centre, and warm light flickering through the entrance tunnels. You step inside one, ducking beneath a thick hide flap. Suddenly the wind disappears. You're in a circular room, half wood, half earth, and entirely safe from the cold. The central fire crackles. The walls are insulated by the land itself. The roof, a ribcage of logs covered in thatch and dirt, holds firm against the snow that now rests on top like frosting. Here, a historical fact. These earth lodges weren't just winter shelters, they were year-round homes designed especially for the harsh winters of the northern plains. And they were often shared by multiple families, sometimes up to 20 people in one lodge, cosy but not cramped, just enough warmth to go around. And here's something quirky. Some of these lodges were deliberately aligned to cardinal directions believed to be spiritual as well as practical. You're not just warm, you're in harmony with the cosmos. Now that's heating with style, but scholars still debate. Were these homes copied from even older nomadic pit houses, or were they independently developed by settled tribes adapting to new climates and needs? The jury's still out. Either way, you're grateful for the result, because it means your toes aren't frostbitten right now. Night deepens, the stars blink awake, and as you sit near the hearth, the lodge murmuring with the soft sounds of children playing and elders sharing stories, you realise this wasn't just about survival, it was about thriving, creating comfort, safety, and community, even in the bleakest months of the year. You lie back on a bed of furs, soffit against your spine and close your eyes. The snow keeps falling, but in here, you're wrapped in the wisdom of people who look winter in the eye and said, "Not today." You wake up to the gentle crackle of embers still burning low in the hearth. The lodge is quiet now, except for the occasional stretch and sigh of someone shifting beneath a pile of blankets made from buffalo hides and woven mats. The fire's warmth lingers in the walls and floor, and your breath doesn't puff out into mist anymore. Outside, it's another story. The wind howls against the dome's earthen sides like a wolf denied entry, but in here, the cold can't reach you. Eventually, you slip back through the entrance tunnel, stepping out into the snow-blanketed world. The air slaps your cheeks, and the contrast is brutal. You get it now. Why shelter matters so much, especially out here, where winter doesn't play fair. And that's when the question finally sinks in. How did they figure all this out? How did native people, scattered across vast, wildly different environments, crack the code of surviving and even thriving through some of the most merciless winters on the continent? You trudge across the frozen ground, your thoughts drifting as slowly as the falling snow. Shelter isn't just about architecture, it's about understanding your environment intimately. Every wind pattern, every season, every animal that could provide materials, and every trick the land had up its icy sleeve. Let's be real. If you were just dumped out here with nothing but modern clothing and a YouTube tutorial, you'd last maybe 2 days, 3 if you're stubborn. But these people, they built a culture around weathering the cold, literally. You begin to realize that winter wasn't a surprise to them. It was a predictable, planned-for part of the cycle of life. And it shaped how they lived, what they wore, where they camped, and how they designed their homes. You reach higher ground now, the wind's stronger here. In the distance, snowdrifts have curled up against the silhouettes of yet more shelters. Different this time. Narrower, taller, made from bark, bent saplings, and animal hides. You squint and make out smoke rising lazily from their tops. These aren't lodges, they are something else entirely. But we'll get to those soon enough. For now, let's pause and dig into the mindset behind all these designs. When you're facing minus 40-degree nights with winds sharp enough to skin you, you can't just slap together a few sticks and hope for the best. You need to think like a survivalist engineer. And in a world without nails, saws, or blueprints, that meant watching nature, mimicking animals, and adapting fast. Here's a historical fact for you. Many indigenous tribes developed seasonal living strategies. That meant one kind of home for summer and a totally different kind for winter. Why? Because staying in one place year-round wasn't always the smartest move. Sometimes it was better to pack up, travel a few days to a better wintering site, more shelter, more food, less wind, and set up a winter camp that was built specifically for the coldest months. You can almost hear the echo of advice passed down through generations. Don't winter here. Too exposed. The wind comes down from the north and takes your soul with it. And the quirky part? Some of these winter camps were chosen not just for practical reasons, but for spiritual ones. A bend in the river with a south-facing slope, a grove of sacred trees that held heat longer, even a specific spot where the sun hit the earth just right during solstice. Warmth and a belief weren't separate. They were woven together like the reed mats lining a wigwam wall. But here's where the scholarly debates kick in. Not all shelters were preserved, especially ones made of perishable materials. So archaeologists argue, were these pit dwellings more widespread than we thought? Were some types of winter housing regional inventions or trade-based adaptations? You can almost hear them, arguing over carbon-dated charcoal samples and soil composition, trying to map out a story the snow has long since erased. As you walk, you start noticing natural features that could be used as part of a shelter. A rock outcropping that blocks wind, a low hollow that could be dug deeper and roofed over, thick trees that even bare-limbed in winter still offer a sense of boundary and protection. And you begin to understand it's not just about building a shelter, it's about building the right shelter in the right place, every time. You stop for a moment, the snow now clinging to your eyelashes, and take it all in. The idea that native people were somehow primitive or simply lucky to survive these winters starts to sound absurd. This was calculated, intelligent, deeply localized knowledge passed down for generations. You feel a kind of reverence bubble up, a respect for people who didn't just live on the land, but with it, constantly negotiating with its moods. And maybe that's what makes these shelters so fascinating. They weren't just buildings, they were symbiotic. They breathed with the seasons. Their materials were gathered from the land, returned to the land. They were built in rhythm with the environment, not in opposition to it. And they worked. Even now, in the age of synthetic insulation and triple-pane windows, the principles still apply. Heat rises, wind steals warmth. Snow can insulate if used right, and if you dig down a little, into the earth, into history, you might just find a way to outlast the storm. As the sun dips behind the ridge and the sky fades to bruised purple, you notice smoke curling from another shelter in the distance, a different design again. Taller, leaner, built for a different kind of cold, you make your way toward it, boots crunching on the hardened snow. The deeper into winter you go, the more answers await you, hidden in the quiet warmth behind handmade doors. You reach the shelter just as twilight folds over the snowy plains like a thick woolen blanket. The sky is dimming fast, and you're cold in a way that's no longer poetic. It's getting serious, but the structure ahead promises refuge. It looks earthy, literally. Like a grassy hill decided to grow a doorway. You walk closer and realise this isn't a natural mound, it's a home. The entrance is low and tunnel-like, framed with thick logs and covered in tightly packed soil. The smell hits you first. Wood smoke, damp earth, and something savoury cooking over an open flame. You duck your head and crawl in. Inside, the world shifts completely. The air is warm and thick with the scent of people living closely together. Furs, herbs, smoke and life. A central crackles below an open smoke hole above. The ceiling is a tangle of massive timber beams, a skeletal ribcage supporting the earth piled above. You're in an earth lodge, and it's both more primitive and more advanced than you expected. You can feel how the walls retain the heat, how the floor, dug slightly below ground, traps warmth and cuts the wind. This is the architectural answer of the Mandan, Hidatsa and Arikara peoples, among others, who lived along the Missouri River long before Europeans showed up with bricks and blueprints. And let's be honest, your apartment complex would fall apart in a blizzard before this place even blinked. These structures were made for serious winters, where temperatures dipped well below zero and snow piled up to the eaves, which, conveniently, just looked like more of the ground. Here's your historical fact. Earth lodges could range from 30 to 60 feet in diameter and housed multiple families, sometimes 20 or more people under one roof. That's not just shelter, that's community. Each family had their own area, often marked off by reed mats or storage piles. There was a central hearth for cooking and warmth, and the smoke hole doubled as a rudimentary chimney and nightlight, depending on how the fire burned. It's not fancy, but it works, perfectly adapted to a landscape that offers wind, snow, and almost nothing else for 6 months out of the year. And here's a strange little detail you might not expect. Many of these lodges were built in such a way that they blended entirely into the landscape. From a distance, they look like natural hills. Some researchers believe this wasn't just for insulation, but also for protection, both from weather and from rival tribes or animal predators. Invisibility was survival. A nice side effect? When winter came roaring in, the snow added another layer of insulation. That's right. The very stuff trying to kill you also helped to keep you warm, if you let it. Now, scholars have debated whether the Earth Lodge evolved independently, or was an adaptation of older pit dwellings, possibly borrowed or traded through migration and cultural exchange. It's hard to say. Archaeological evidence is tricky when most of the material used was biodegradable. Still, what's undeniable is that the design worked, and it worked well enough to remain in use for centuries. You settle near the fire, careful not to block the draft that pulls smoke up and out. Around you, life is happening. An elder braids sweetgrass beside a hanging pot of soup that smells like wild onions and something meaty. Children are curled into piles of furs, whispering stories. Someone snores softly from a corner. No one's rushing. No one's checking the weather app. The fire is tended, the walls are thick, and outside winter rages alone. It's quiet, but not empty. The lodge holds voices from dozens of winters past. Stories about hunts, about spirits glimpsed in the snow, about survival when things got harder than hard. You feel that depth. Like the very walls have absorbed not just heat but memory. Everything in here serves a purpose. Those bundles hanging overhead, dried corn, smoked meat, maybe even medicinal herbs. That depression in the floor near the fire, a place to bank coals overnight, so the fire never really dies. Even the way people sleep, curled in groups, furs layered over bodies, maximizes warmth and minimizes risk. This isn't just a house, it's a thermal ecosystem. You run your fingers along the inside wall, feeling how the woven willows beneath the earth still breathe with the temperature inside. There's an art to it, combining materials that don't rot easily, layering them for strength and flexibility, always knowing what's local and what's durable. You think of modern insulation, all plastic and foam and fiberglass, and how little it respects the land it comes from. This is different. This gives back. When a lodge was finally abandoned or fell apart, it returned to the earth almost completely. No waste, no leftovers, just a patch of slightly raised soil maybe, and a memory. You glance up and notice a small shelf built near the top of the support posts, just under the roof. It's lined with little objects, figures carved from bone, tiny bundles of feathers, bits of quartz, protective charms, offerings, maybe even toys depending on who you ask. Not everything in the lodge is practical. Some of it is spiritual. Because warmth isn't just about body temperature, it's about knowing you're safe. It's about believing the ancestors are near, watching over the fire, and in a place like this, you could almost believe it. Eventually, someone offers you a warm drink, thick, herbal, a little bitter. You sip it slowly, grateful for the heat spreading through your belly. Outside, the snow is still falling, but inside you're wrapped in something much older than any electric heater. This is engineering born from necessity, culture and observation. No schematics, just wisdom. Before you leave, you look around one last time, memorizing every curve and texture. The smoke-stained beams, the packed earth walls, the soft glow of coals reflecting in tired eyes. The world might be freezing, but you're warm, and not just in your body, in your bones. You leave the Earth Lodge before dawn when the stars are still clinging to the sky and the cold is at its meanest. Your breath crystallizes instantly, and even your eyelashes feel like they're turning into icicles. It's the kind of cold that punches through your coat and goes straight for your soul. The kind that doesn't just test your endurance, it mocks it. But you press forward, snow crunching beneath your feet like dry bones, moving eastward now toward thick woods and rivers that have long since frozen over. The terrain shifts slowly. The wide open plains are giving way to dense forests, tall pines and leafless oaks standing like silent sentinels. The wind here is muted, absorbed by the trees, and the snow lies deeper and softer underfoot. It's easier to hide from winter here, easier to build with the forest's bounty. And that's exactly what you're about to see, nestled in a clearing as another kind of shelter, less like a hill, more like a cocoon. You approach slowly, trying not to break the hush. This one's shaped like a dome, or sometimes more like a stretched oval, with a frame of bent saplings covered in bark, woven mats and animal hides. Smoke seeps from the top, and there's a narrow opening near the ground, partly covered with a woven reed door. You've arrived at a wigwam, and this is winter survival, woodland style. Inside, the smell of damp moss, pine and smoke greets you before your eyes adjust to the dim light. It's quieter in here, more intimate. The space is smaller than the Earth Lodge, but just as warm, its walls layered with everything the surrounding forest could offer. Birch bark, spruce boughs, woven rush mats, thick and fragrant. You're surrounded by textures and scents that feel more like the woods than a house, and that's exactly the point. This is how Algonquian-speaking tribes like the Ojibwe, Mi'kmaq, and Abenaki outwitted the cold. They didn't dig deep into the ground. Instead, they bent young saplings, often willow or ash, into arches and lashed them into a dome frame. Then came the insulation. Bark, mats, fur, whatever they had. A fire burned at the centre, and the smoke hole above worked like a primitive chimney. You can feel the difference right away. It's warmer than it should be for something that looks so light from the outside. The bark and hides trap the heat inside, and the close quarters help bodies share warmth. Here's your historical fact. Wigwams weren't just one shape or size. In winter, they tended to be more tightly sealed, built lower to the ground to conserve heat, and often shared by a single family or two. In warmer months, the structure could be larger and more open to allow airflow. The frame stayed up year-round, and the coverings could be changed with the seasons. It's modular architecture, long before that was a buzzword. And here's your quirky twist. Some winter wigwams had floors padded with layers of spruce or fir branches, both to insulate and to provide a pleasant aroma. Imagine that, your freezing forest floor turned into a pine-scented carpet. They didn't just survive, they made the cold smell nice. Of course, scholars still love to argue about terminology. Wigwam is a catch-all term that doesn't capture the full range of regional and cultural variations. Some were called weetus, others called wetuomuk or domed lodges. The materials, names and designs varied wildly depending on geography and tribe, but regardless of name, the concept was beautifully simple and profoundly effective. You settle near the fire and watch the people inside work with a kind of effortless rhythm. One person tends the fire, while another patches a gap in the wall with woven mats. A woman stirs a pot of soup, its steam carrying the scent of smoked fish and wild herbs. A child sharpens a bone tool with surprising focus. Everything here has a role. Even the way they sit, close together, limbs draped in furs, is calculated to retain warmth. No one sprawls. Every inch of space has a purpose. You glance at the walls again. Some of the bark is painted. Simple geometric patterns, maybe passed down from generations. Symbols of weather, stars, animals. The kind of art you only notice when you're inside long enough for your eyes to relax. It feels like the shelter is not just a house, but a smooth, second protective layer stretched over a family. Outside, snow is falling again. Not gently this time, heavily, in thick curtains that swallow the woods and make even sound feel distant. But the people here aren't worried. In fact, they seem comfortable. You notice a small bundle tucked near the fire. A baby, swaddled in fur and sleeping so deeply the storm might as well not exist. That's how good this shelter is. You start to wonder what it would take to build one yourself. Could you bend saplings in the right season? Harvest birch bark without damaging the tree? Weave mats tight enough to keep out the wind? Maybe, if someone taught you. But doing it alone? Unlikely. That's the hidden lesson. These shelters weren't solo projects. They were built by families, by communities. Knowledge passed down by repetition and rhythm, not YouTube tutorials. As you sip a hot drink offered by your hosts, maybe cedar tea or something root-based and slightly bitter, you realise again that survival here wasn't just about warmth. It was about connection. Shelter wasn't separate from life. It was life, and it brought people close together, in every sense. Before you leave, someone hands you a bundle of cedar boughs tied with a strip of deerskin. It smells like deep forest and smoke, and you tuck it into your coat. A memory, or maybe a charm. The wigwam behind you glows like an ember in the darkening woods as you step back into the cold, ready to see what other wisdom this landscape has hidden in its frozen corners. The snow is relentless now, falling in thick, heavy flakes that soak through your outer layers and melt against your skin in slow, chilling trickles. You wrap your coat tighter, tucking the cedar bundle inside like a secret, and follow a set of shallow tracks curving east toward the edge of the forest. The trees begin to thin, and you feel the landscape shift again. Less dense now, more open, like it's preparing you for something vast. And then you see it. Rising tall from the snowy ground framed against a flat horizon is a towering cone made of stretched hides, secured with ropes and smoke curling lazily from the top. You've reached the domain of the teepee, the iconic winter home of the Plains tribes. And yes, it's just as impressive in real life as it looks in old paintings and museum dioramas. Except now you're not looking at a lifeless exhibit. You're standing in front of a living shelter, the firelight flickering from within. The snow sliding effortlessly down its smooth sides like it knows not to mess with this engineering. You duck through the flap and step inside. Instantly warmth surrounds you. Not a dry, artificial heat, but something more radiant. The fire in the centre burns bright and steady, smoke slipping through the circular opening above. Around you the interior is lined with furs, blankets, and painted hides. There's a calm hum of activity. Someone stirring a pot, someone sharpening an arrowhead, a soft lullaby being hummed beneath layers of buffalo robes. What hits you first is how efficient this space is. The shape isn't just aesthetic, it's practical. The conical design sheds wind and snow like a champ, while the hide covering keeps heat in and water out. The fire warms the air, and the rising smoke creates a draft that pulls fresh air in from below. No carbon monoxide here, thank you very much. And the space? Surprisingly roomy, tall enough to stand in and move around, yet compact enough to stay cozy even in deep winter. Here's your historical fact. The teepee, or thipi in the Lakota language, was widely used by tribes such as the Lakota, Cheyenne, Crow and Blackfoot, especially those who followed the migratory bison herds. These shelters were portable, durable, and could be assembled or disassembled in under an hour by experienced hands. But during winter, they weren't just used on the move. Some teepees were outfitted specifically for cold weather, double-walled with extra hide layers or insulated with grass and moss stuffed between skins. You're standing in one of those now, a winter-grade teepee, and it's holding off the storm with casual elegance. Here's the quirky bit. Some teepees had interior liners made of decorated hide or woven fabric. These weren't just decorative, they created a layer of air insulation between the inner and outer covers, reducing drafts and keeping the warmth closer to the floor. Function meets fashion, 19th century edition. You sit down on a fur near the fire and study the poles arching above you. Long, slender lodge poles reaching skyward, tied at the top and fanned out in perfect symmetry. Every pole was carefully chosen and often reused year after year. And here's where things get a little metaphysical. Each pole wasn't just a piece of wood, it had meaning. The Lakota, for example, associated the poles with values or prayers, and raising the teepee was sometimes a ceremonial act. This wasn't just home construction, it was sacred geometry. And of course, debates rage among scholars about how exactly the teepee evolved. Some argue it developed independently on the plains, others suggest it was influenced by earlier hide tents from other regions. There are even theories that climate change and bison migration patterns forced certain tribes to get more mobile, though, and more innovative. But whatever its origin, the result is undeniable. The teepee is a masterpiece of cold weather design. As you take in your surroundings, you realise how deeply every part of this structure is tied to the lives of its builders. The buffalo hides weren't just material, they were survival. Hunted, tanned, sewn by hand, and used not only for the teepee walls, but for clothing, bedding, and tools. A single animal could help keep a family alive through months of bitter cold. It's humbling, really. You think about your synthetic parka mass-produced in some faraway factory and wonder how long it would last if stripped of all its zippers and seams. A woman near the fire catches your glance and smiles, motioning toward a painted section of the hide wall. You crawl over and run your fingers across the artwork, faded but still vivid. Horses, bison, lightning bolts, human figures in motion. A story, painted in ochre and charcoal, wrapping the inside of the home like a living tapestry. These weren't just decorations, they were records, histories, warnings, dreams. The teepee was memory storage too. Outside, the storm has picked up, but inside you can barely hear it. The double wall muffles the sound and the fire crackles steadily, unbothered. Someone pulls a curtain across the entrance, and now the only light comes from the flames and the faint glow of burning embers. You stretch your legs out toward the warmth and let yourself relax into the rhythm of the space. It breathes with its own logic, close, efficient, functional, spiritual. As the fire dims and the night deepens, you're reminded again that warmth isn't just a luxury. It's a form of resistance, a refusal to be undone by the cold, and native peoples didn't just survive winters on the plains. They did so while raising children, telling stories, hunting game, and making art inside a shelter designed by generations of observation and wisdom. Eventually you stand and prepare to leave, brushing snow off your shoulders as you step back out into the open. The teepee behind you glows like a lantern in the storm. You keep walking, the snow falling heavier now, but you don't mind as much. You've seen what a few poles and some hides can do, and you're starting to understand that real warmth has very little to do with what's on a thermostat. By now, the snow has softened everything, the sounds, the outlines, even your own thoughts. It muffles the crunch of your steps and swallows the horizon into a vague, glowing blur. You walk eastward again, deeper into the wooded hills where the rivers curve like frozen silver veins and the trees wear heavy cloaks of frost. The teepee behind you fades into memory, its flickering warmth still lingering in your skin. But here, among the pines and birches, something different awaits. You don't see it at first, it's low to the ground, nestled between tree trunks like it's hiding from the wind. The entrance is round and modest, partially obscured by snow-covered mats. You clear the edges with your glove and pull aside the flap. The air that spills out is dense and woody, tinged with pine smoke and the unmistakable scent of wet bark. You've just stepped into a wigwam again, but this time it's a winter-specific design. adapted for the snow-heavy forests of the northeast. Inside it's dim and close. The walls curve inward, arching up into a rounded roof made of interwoven saplings, padded with bark panels, pine boughs and layers of woven reeds that have clearly been replaced and repaired dozens of times. It's not big, probably enough room for 1 or 2 families, but it's snug, warm and surprisingly dry. The floor is covered in cedar branches and hides, and in the centre burns a low, steady fire, the smoke escaping through a small vent above. Compared to the tall elegance of the teepee, this is a different kind of genius. Compact, low profile, and expertly insulated. This wigwam belongs to the Algonquian-speaking tribes of the northeast. Think Wampanoag, Nipmuc, Abenaki, and Othiers, whose territories stretched through New England and into what is now eastern Canada. These winter wigwams were built to resist the brutal nor'easters and deep snows of the region. Unlike the summer versions, which might be open-topped or larger for ventilation, winter wigwams were reinforced, sealed tightly with extra layers, and designed to retain heat like a slow cooker. Here's your historical fact: these winter homes often used birch bark, chosen not just for its abundance, but because it's lightweight, waterproofed, and easy to work with even in freezing conditions. Birch bark peels in sheets, curls naturally into cylindrical shapes, and even contains flammable oils that make it a great fire starter. Not bad for tree skin. And the quirky twist? Some wigwams included inner rooms, almost like primitive insulation bubbles, small sleeping nooks separated by hanging mats or additional bark panels. In the coldest months, families would sleep in these close quarters, body heat pooled in a small space layered beneath robes and furs while the fire coals smouldered nearby. It turns out the key to winter comfort wasn't just fire, it was knowing how to trap the warmth and stretch it through the night. But here's where things get interesting. Anthropologists have long debated how permanent these shelters really were. Some argue that the wigwam was semi-permanent and rebuilt every year at winter camps. Others believe certain structures were maintained for generations, especially in areas with stable food sources like coastal shellfish beds or migratory game routes. It depends on the region. The debate, like the smoke curling above your head, has no clean exit. You shift on your seat near the fire and notice how the walls, though built from simple materials, feel solid. The interlaced saplings flex just enough to avoid cracking under heavy snow, and the bark, though rough, is surprisingly airtight once pressed together and sealed with mud or moss. You run your fingers over a seam where one sheet of bark overlaps another, held in place by cords of spruce root or sinew. There's no glue, no nails, no screws, just tension, pressure, and skill. The way a basket holds shape, the way a memory holds warmth. A man squats beside the fire, carefully placing stones in the embers, letting them heat until they glow faintly red. He's not cooking, not yet. This is for something else. After a while, he pulls them out with wooden tongs and places them into a hollowed-out depression in the floor. Then slowly he pours water over them from a bark container. Steam rises instantly, spreading across the room like a second skin. You're in a kind of micro-sauna. This is the sweat lodge effect, occasionally used even in family wigwams for warmth or spiritual cleansing. It's not the full ceremonial version, but it adds a humid warmth to the air, softening the dryness of winter. Everyone inside begins to shift, stretch, and breathe a little deeper. The temperature climbs, your gloves come off. Then your hat, then your coat. The heat isn't sharp like a radiator's, it's alive, curling around your spine, filling your lungs. For a moment you forget the snowstorm outside entirely. This isn't just shelter, it's therapy. You watch as a child presses their face close to the firelight, studying the dance of flames in the polished surface of a blackened pot. Another family member checks bundles stored in a lofted rack above. Dried venison, woven bags of cornmeal, medicinal herbs. The ceiling doubles as a pantry. No space is wasted. Every beam, every branch, every mat contributes something to the whole. Eventually, you notice the way the people sit. Not scattered, but gathered tightly around the hearth. The structure encourages it. In the centre, heat and light. At the edges, shadow and chill. The design doesn't just support warmth, it encourages community. No wonder winter was the time for storytelling, for oral histories passed between generations. The wigwam becomes a circle of memory stitched together with firelight and breath. You shift again and realise you don't want to leave just yet. The cold outside feels unreal now, like something distant and exaggerated. In here you could stay for days, weeks, whole seasons. Maybe people did. And when spring finally came, the coverings could be lifted, the walls opened, and life would spill back outside. But tonight, the storm has no intention of stopping. The wind pushes harder at the bark walls, looking for cracks. It finds none. You wrap a fur more tightly around your shoulders, smile at the steam rising from the rocks, and listen to a voice begin telling a story about a giant moose who swallowed the stars. Outside, the snow piles up. Inside, you drift somewhere between dream and firelight. When you step back outside, it's like being born into another world. The warmth clings to your skin for a moment, resisting the intrusion of cold air before finally surrendering to the wind. Snowflakes prick your face sharp and dry, and your breath steams out in thick curls as you pull your coat tight again. The trees sway and creak, releasing powdery flurries with each groan. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snaps with a dull crack. The forest isn't dead, it's just sleeping, and occasionally it stirs. As you follow a narrow trail downhill, your thoughts cling to the memory of that tiny, steaming world you just left. You start noticing something. None of these homes, whether earth lodge, teepee or wigwam, had chimneys, at least not like you'd expect. No fancy brick stacks, no cast iron stoves, but every single one had fire, and somehow they all handled smoke without choking everyone inside. That's not luck, that's design. Tonight, you're learning the quiet brilliance of smoke holes and hearths, two elements that seem obvious, but are actually delicate balances of physics, tradition, and survival. You arrive at a new shelter, this one a rectangular log structure partially dug into the slope of a hill. It's old, clearly well used, and reinforced with stone at the base. This isn't a communal home, but more of a family-sized dwelling, probably from one of the northeastern or Great Lakes tribes during the fur trade era. A longhouse adaptation, compacted for winter. Inside, it's dark and heavy with the scent of aged wood and ash. The smoke from the hearth doesn't billow up in chaos like you expect. Instead, it rolls upward, in a single column, elegant and obedient, pulled toward a precisely cut opening in the roof. Around the hearth, people sit low to the ground, legs stretched out toward the heat. Above, the smoke hole lets just enough air out and just enough fresh air in. Here's your historical fact. Smoke holes weren't just holes, they were engineered. Some tribes, like the Iroquois, used adjustable panels or flaps to control airflow, depending on wind direction. In some shelters, the smoke hole was offset, not centered, to match the prevailing winds of the region. The result, a steady draft that carried smoke out while keeping warmth in. No smoke alarms needed. And now for the quirky bit. In many winter homes, especially those used by tribes in the northeast and subarctic, the fire wasn't always in the centre. Sometimes it was slightly off to the side or even near the entrance, depending on the home's shape and the number of occupants. Why? Because airflow patterns inside small dome spaces are weird. And indigenous builders figured that out long before anyone brought in a physics textbook. You sit by the hearth and start to feel its rhythm. The heat pulses gently, not in bursts like a radiator, but in waves. The fire isn't high, just a tight, bright cluster of coals and flickering flames. It's maintained constantly, never allowed to fully die down. A few carefully placed logs, some slow-burning embers, and the occasional stir to wake it up again. The result is warmth that doesn't dry the air or blast your face, just seeps in and stays. This brings you to a realization. Fire isn't just a heat source. It's a roommate. It requires attention, balance, and respect. Too much fuel and you fill the shelter with choking smoke. Too little and you freeze before dawn. The people here know exactly how to manage it. You watch an elder nudge the logs, shifting a piece of bark to reveal glowing coals beneath. They add a single twig, maybe two, that's it. The flames respond with a gentle flare, like magic, or science, or both. Scholars still argue over whether some of these shelters could really have stayed warm without modern insulation. Tests have been run, some showing the internal temperatures rising 30 or 40 degrees above the outside, even in sub-zero weather. But others point out that warmth isn't just measured in numbers, it's measured in habit, in design, in how you use your body in the space, in how you use fire. You glance up again and see how the ceiling above the smoke hole is darkened, thick with soot from countless winters. No one's rushing to scrub it clean. That patina is earned. It tells a story. You wonder how many nights have passed under the hat spot, how many meals cooked, how many songs sung, how many babies rocked to sleep. A woman nearby points to the stone ring around the hearth. It's not just to keep the fire contained, it's heat storage. The stones absorb warmth and release it slowly, long after the flames die down. In some shelters, heated rocks were even wrapped in hide and placed under bedding for warmth that lasted through the night. Instant hot water bottles, but made of stone and wisdom. You take off your gloves and stretch your fingers toward the fire. There's a small breeze moving across the floor, not enough to be uncomfortable, but enough to feed the fire gently. That's no accident. The builders understood how to place entrances, how to shape the floor, even how high to stack the walls to create that perfect draft. You feel like you're sitting inside a living lung. It breathes, exhales smoke, inhales air, and keeps you alive without ever once raising its voice. And maybe that's the point. These shelters weren't built to overpower nature. They were built to cooperate with it. The fire doesn't fight the cold, it just holds its ground. The smoke doesn't charge out, it rises with grace. Everything about this system feels respectful, quietly brilliant. Like someone watched 1,000 winters and took notes. As the fire settles into a low red glow and the smoke continues its slow dance upward, you think again about how much of modern life is based on brute force, blasting heat, sealing buildings airtight, controlling everything. But here, warmth is a conversation, a negotiation between flame and breath, wood and wind. You pull your coat back on and step outside again, taking one last look at the chimneyless miracle behind you. It's snowing harder now, the flakes thicker, almost clumping together like feathers, but you're not afraid of the cold anymore. You've seen what a well-placed fire and a carefully carved hole can do. You've felt the warmth of a hearth that never tries to be more than it is. And as you continue down the trail, your path lit by the soft glow of snow catching firelight in the distance, you can't help but think, maybe we've overcomplicated things. By morning, the snow has crusted into a brittle shell, and every step crunches loud and hollow beneath your boots. It's colder than it was last night, somehow sharper, the kind of cold that reaches into your joints and politely asks to move in. But the sky's clearer now, streaked with pale pink and silver, and the wind has gone quiet for a while, holding its breath like the world is waiting for something. You follow a narrow frozen trail deeper north, where the trees grow scraggly and thin, their shapes twisted by years of snow load and freezing wind. This is the kind of place where mild winter is a lie told only by foolish travellers. You're headed into subarctic territory, where the cold is not an inconvenience but a full-time presence, and surviving it takes a different level of skill. The land opens into rolling tundra, the trees falling away until you feel exposed on every side. Just when you start to wonder if you've walked into an empty world, you spot it. A low, sloping tent built from wooden poles and covered in thick layers of hides. Dark brown, rounded at the top, stitched with care, and weathered by wind and time. You found a caribou skin tent, and tonight you're stepping into the world of the Den, the Chippewayan, and the other Athabascan-speaking peoples who knew how to survive a winter that tried very hard to erase you. You duck inside, and at once the wind disappears. The space is close and dim, lit only by the coals of a low fire. The smell is sharp and earthy, charcoal, ferns, and something almost sweet that you can't quite name. The walls are made from multiple layers of caribou hide, thick and softened with age, each piece sewn together with sinew in long, careful stitches. A few small flaps near the top allow smoke to escape, but it's warmer than you expected, almost cozy. The sound of the wind is muffled into a soft murmur, like it's been locked outside. Caribou hide isn't just a material, it's a miracle. Here's your historical fact. The Dene and other subarctic peoples used caribou not just for food and clothing, but for shelter. The hides are light, incredibly warm, and naturally insulating. 2 layers, with fur facing both inward and out, could trap heat so efficiently that a small fire was all it took to survive brutal nights where temperatures plunged below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. In the absence of bison or large forest timber, the caribou was everything. A moving warehouse with legs. And here's your quirky fact. Some families in the far north crafted portable wooden floors from spruce branches lashed together, which were laid inside the tent to keep bedding off the frozen ground. Others used snowshoes, sleds, or even sled dog harness frames as the makeshift furniture, anything to keep your body elevated just a few inches above the frost. Turns out, in weather like this, those few inches can be the difference between sleep and survival. You sit beside the fire and watch someone arrange firewood. Thin spruce branches, bone dry, stacked in a tight triangle. The flame is small, not wasteful. Fuel is precious here. Everything burns fast in this dry, cold air. and the line between too much and too little heat is razor thin. Too much fire and the hides could dry out or crack. Too little and you'd all wake up numb and sick. Like always, there's a balance. A pot rests on a few stones above the coals, seam curling up with the smell of boiled roots and dried meat. This is not a place of abundance. Winter food is rationed carefully, gathered over months, dried, smoked, stored in caches buried beneath the snow or tucked into rocky hillsides. The people here know how to stretch every ounce of effort. Every stick of wood, every piece of meat, every breath of warmth, it all counts. You notice the design of the tent more as your eyes adjust. The interior is cone-shaped, similar to a teepee, but shorter and thicker in proportion. The poles are fewer, sturdier, spaced to distribute snow weight evenly, and the entrance, a low, tunnel-like flap that you have to crawl through, helping keep warm air inside. It's a barrier, a windbreak, and a psychological checkpoint. Once you pass through, you're in a different world. A world of calm, of heat, of shared breath and ancient stories, but not everyone agrees on how long these tents were lived in. Some researchers argue they were temporary shelters used during caribou hunts or during migration. Others believe families wintered in them for weeks at a time, moving from one site to another when resources ran low. The debate continues, hinging on archaeology that's often buried beneath centuries of snow and shifting ground. But what's clear is that wherever these tents appeared, they worked. No excess, no decoration, just function polished to the point of beauty. A woman sits across from you, her face weathered, and her hands swift and silent as she threads sinew through the edge of a hide, mending a seam that's open just a bit from the dry air. This tent, you realise, isn't just a home, it's a living thing. It breathes with the weather. It wears out. It gets repaired. Each patch, each new seam, is a quiet history of storms survived. In the corner, a sleeping area is set up, layers of hides piled high shaped like a shallow nest. Children sleep there, bundled together in the layers of fur and woven cloth. Dogs lie curled nearby, their body heat adding to the warm pocket. In some camps, dogs even shared bedding space with people, acting like small, furry radiators. Warmth here is a team effort. As the fire dims to a red, pulsing glow, you lean back against the hide wall and close your eyes for a moment. The wind moans faintly outside, brushing the tent like a fingertip against a drum. You can hear snow sliding off the outer layer. Inside, it's still. The tent exhales quietly through the smoke hole, and you feel its rhythm. Inhale, exhale, burn, breathe. A shelter this simple shouldn't be this good, but it is. Eventually you crawl back through the low entrance and out into the frozen light. The snow crunches, the sky has brightened just enough to hurt your eyes, and you feel the cold return to your cheeks like a slap and a whisper, but your bones still carry the heat of the fire. You walk on, now more sure than ever that the genius of winter shelter isn't just about keeping warm, it's about knowing what not to do. Don't waste, don't fight the cold, outsmart it, don't build big, build smart. The farther north you go, the more every decision matters. And somewhere behind you in that little caribou skin cone, life continues, quiet, warm, and totally unbothered by the endless winter swirling outside. The snowfield stretches on, empty and glowing under the morning sun, which hangs low and orange near the horizon like it's too tired to climb any higher. Your boots crunch through the crust, the cold biting less fiercely now that your body's learned the rhythm. Move, breathe, stay dry, don't stop too long. It's not comfortable, but it's manageable. And by now you've come to expect the next shelter will appear not in grand reveal, but as part of the landscape. Something quiet, something earned. You keep moving north. The terrain grows starker. The trees vanish. The hills flatten. Everything becomes white and wind-carved. You've crossed an invisible line into the Arctic, where temperatures aren't just low, they're spiteful. You pull your hood tighter and squint into the bright world. Somewhere out here, there's a shelter made not from wood or hide or bark, but from snow itself. Then you see it. Low to the ground, almost hidden behind a windbreak made of snow blocks, is a dome. Not tall, not dramatic, just smooth, clean and solid, curved like a dropped pearl on a field of ice. You've arrived at the most misunderstood survival icon on the continent. The igloo? Yes, the snow house of the Inuit. You crouch and enter through a short tunnel that dips down before rising again. Cold air settles low, heat rises, and this clever S-shaped entrance ensures the two stay politely separated. Inside, you pause. It's quiet, warmer than expected. Dim, but not dark. The light filters through the compacted snow like sunlight through frosted glass. Everything glows faintly blue-white. You're inside a structure made entirely of winter, and somehow you're not freezing. Here's your historical fact. Contrary to popular cartoons, Inuit didn't live in igloos year-round. These snow shelters were primarily winter hunting shelters, used along sea ice or inland trails where no materials but snow could be found. In some cases, families could spend days, even weeks inside them, with sizes ranging from solo hunting huts to multi-room shelters big enough for several people. And no, they didn't melt from the fire inside because the inner air temperature rarely rose above 50 degrees, but in 40 DGF weather, that's practically summer. You sit on a snow bench covered in caribou hide, and someone passes you a seal oil lamp, a small bowl-like object called a kullik, carved from stone and burning with a flame as steady as it is quiet. It's fueled by rendered seal or whale blubber, and emits a clean heat that warms the igloo gently, slowly, without filling it with smoke. It also provides light, dries clothing, and can cook small amounts of food. You hold your hands near it, and the warmth sinks into your bones like a secret. And now the quirky fact. The snow blocks used to build an igloo aren't just packed slush. They're carefully cut from wind-compacted snow that's dense enough to hold its shape but still full of tiny air pockets that trap heat. That's right. Frozen water insulates better than you'd think if it's the right kind of snow. Fresh powder, useless. But snow that's been sculpted by the wind and weathered for days. That's prime building material. Inuit builders could judge its quality just by the sound of their saws slicing through. You look up. The ceiling arches above you in a perfect dome, every block angled slightly inward. This isn't amateur work, it's geometry meets instinct. Inuit builders, often without any formal measurements, could shape these blocks into a self-supporting spiral. No glue, no beams, just sew and pressure and patience. And the interior walls? Smooth, rounded, even beautiful in their way. It's not just shelter, it's art. But the debates, of course, still swirl like snow around scholars. Some argue that the igloo's iconic status overshadows the semi-subterranean sod houses many Inuit families lived in for longer periods, which were warmer, more permanent, and often shared by multiple generations. Others suggest that the igloo was never as widespread as movies have claimed, and that most Inuit relied on a mix of snow houses, skin tents, and dug-in lodges depending on season and region. Like most things, the answer is, it depends, but none of that makes the igloo less remarkable. Someone offers you a strip of dried Arctic char, chewy and rich, and you accept it gratefully. Inside the igloo, time slows. You hear the soft flick of the kullik flame, the occasional creak of packed snow shifting slightly with the temperature, the muffled wind scouring the world outside. There's no electricity, no insulation panels, no Wi-Fi, and yet this space feels complete, safe, even kind of homey. You reach out and touch the wall. It's cold, of course, but not freezing. The snow is so densely packed it doesn't melt on contact. Instead, it reflects your own body heat back at you, and the igloo holds it. This dome, made in hours with a simple curved blade and a deep knowledge of snow, is a thermal battery. A small miracle under a sky that offers no comfort. And then you notice something unexpected. The acoustics. The igloo is quiet, but not dead. Sound travels smoothly, bouncing gently around the curved walls without echo or harshness. It feels intimate, whisper-friendly. You wonder how many stories have been told in here, how many plans made, how many songs sung, because even in the hardest months, people didn't stop being people. They didn't stop talking, laughing, mourning, hoping. The shelter wasn't just about surviving, it was about making space for all of that too. As you prepare to leave, you crouch again through the low tunnel, and emerge into the blinding light of snow and sky. The igloo behind you doesn't look impressive from the outside, just a lump of snow on a blank canvas. But now you know better. Inside, it's geometry and tradition and survival distilled into something so simple it hurts your brain. And it worked. That's the thing. It worked. You walk on, vision shimmering with the light reflecting off the snow, the air so clean it almost stings. Every breath you take is filtered through frost. Every step you make, you're walking in the footsteps of people who knew this place, loved this place, and refused to let winter be the end of the story. And behind you, the snow dome sits quietly, glowing in the sunlight like it's always been there, and probably will be again. The wind has changed. You feel it in the way the snow moves, lighter now, shifting in spirals and tiny stinging sheets that sneak under your hood and nip at your neck. The sky is grey again, layered like slate, and your boots crunch through drift after drift. It's the kind of cold that erases the idea of spring altogether, like warmth was just a myth you once believed in. But now that you've crawled through snow domes and sweat-lodged wigwams, you're starting to see the cold not as a wall, but as a teacher, and shelter as the answer to every difficult question it asks. What's next isn't obvious at first. There are no visible structures, no roofs poking above the snow. But as you move across a frozen riverbank, you spot what looks like a dip in the earth, a shallow trench with snow mounded along the edges. You descend carefully and brush away a loose flap of woven reeds. Half covered in snow, the wind stops. The air changes. You've stepped into something unexpected. This is a river reed hut, also known in some places as a tule mat lodge, used by indigenous peoples in parts of the Great Basin and Pacific Northwest, especially those who lived near marshlands and rivers. Tribes like the Modoc, Klamath and Northern Paiute crafted these elegant, low-profile shelters using what was abundant. Water-loving plants like tule reeds, cattails and sedge. You wouldn't think it, but this is a winter home, and it's surprisingly good at what it does. Inside, the smell is distinct. Damp earth, dried vegetation, faint wood smoke. You duck beneath the woven covering and find yourself in a shallow circular space. The floor has been dug a foot or more below ground level, ringed with stone and earth, and layered with dry grasses and rush mats. The walls and roof curve over you in overlapping reed panels that bend but don't break, tied together with cordage made from bark or sinew. The overall feeling is of being inside a woven basket sunk into the earth. It's unexpectedly beautiful. Here's your historical fact. Tule and other river reeds have natural insulating properties, especially when dried. The air pockets between the stalks trap warmth the same way down feathers or modern fiberglass insulation do. When layered in overlapping mats, they form a kind of waterproof, windproof barrier that resists even icy air. Paired with a shallow pit floor, which traps warm air and avoids cold drafts, you have a home that, while humble in appearance, punches well above its weight class in winter survival. The quirky detail? These mats were removable and portable. Families could roll them up, carry them from camp to camp and reuse them for different shelters, sometimes even in summer, reconfigured for shade and airflow. A tule mat lodge could grow or shrink based on the season. One structure, 4 seasons, endless adaptability. It's basically the backpacker's dream house. You settle onto a bed of dry reeds, laid over hides, and feel the springy give beneath your weight. A small fire burns in a pit at the centre, ringed with stones and tucked beneath a smoke vent in the roof. A hole cleverly protected by a small reed-covered dome that sheds rain and snow, but still lets smoke drift out. The fire's low and slow, just enough to warm the air without setting your cosy basket house ablaze. Around you, the walls breathe, literally. The reed mats allow a tiny exchange of air, preventing stuffiness and smoke build-up without letting in drafts. In a cold climate, too much ventilation is dangerous. Too little, even worse, but this is just enough. You feel the air moving gently against your skin, circulating, subtle, alive. You watch as a woman near the fire patches a spot in one of the reed walls with fresh cordage, pulling it tight, reinforcing the weave. This home isn't meant to last forever. It's meant to last exactly as long as it's needed. When spring comes, the mats will be dried again, re-rolled, maybe used as sleeping pads, or even traded to neighbouring camps. Nothing goes to waste. Of course, scholars debate how well these homes really held up in deep winter. Some claim they were only used in transitional seasons, or in milder coastal climates. Others argue that with enough reed layers and the addition of animal hides or clay daubing in the coldest months, they could become perfectly suitable even in snow-heavy regions. Archaeological evidence is spotty. Reed and grass structures don't fossilise well, and most of what we know comes from oral history, colonial accounts, and a few surviving examples built for cultural preservation. But as you sit here, perfectly warm in a hut made entirely from plants, you can't help but think, if it didn't work, it wouldn't have lasted centuries. The family inside moves slowly, deliberately. Every motion is practical. A child sweeps pine needles toward the fire, adding scent and poke to keep insects at bay. Even in winter, the trick helps. Another person tends a pot of fish broth bubbling faintly with the sharp, clean scent of river herbs. Above you, small bundles of dried plants hang from the crossbeams, likely sage, maybe sweetgrass or wild onions. The shelter is sparse but alive with intention. You realise slowly that part of the genius of these lodges is not what they are, but what they aren't. They're not heavy, they're not complicated, they're not permanent. These homes acknowledge that the land changes, rivers flood, snow melts, food moves. Instead of fighting that, they move with it. You don't need a fortress to survive the winter. Sometimes you just need the right reeds, the right knots, and the right hands to tie it all together. As the fire dims and you prepare to leave, you push aside the reed door and step back into the wind. The hut disappears behind you like it grew from the ground itself. No loud footprint, no heavy mark. Just a memory and a ring in the snow. You climb out of the river hollow and glance back once, then keep walking, snow clinging to your boots. You're heading for colder ground again, but you feel ready now. The huts, domes and lodges behind you were never meant to last forever. They were meant to carry people through the hardest part of the year, and so far they haven't let you down. The snow changes again, less dry now, almost damp, and the ground underneath feels different as you walk, less crunch, more give. You've come down from the high plains and tundra into a region where the rivers run wider, the valleys deeper, and the winters, just as cruel, but in a sneakier way. No screaming wind, no blizzards flinging snow sideways, just a slow, steady freeze that builds over months, biting through bark and bone alike. This is the Pacific Northwest, not the gentle, rainy part near the ocean, but the inland river valleys where winter's a quieter predator. And here, hidden beneath the snowy lip of a hill, is a doorway to one of the cleverest winter shelters on the continent. You spot it only when you're close, just a square opening at the top of a mound, with a bundle of smoke drifting upward like it's late for something. There's no visible door, no path, no porch, just earth. You lower yourself into the entrance, feet first, descending a short, steep shaft carved into the snow and soil. At the bottom, you duck through a tunnel, and then, light. Firelight. You step into the centre of a Chinookan pit house, and just like that, the cold is gone. The warmth hits you in slow waves. Not a blast, more like stepping into a warm bath after hours in the cold. The interior is deep, carved into the earth like a wide bowl, roofed over with huge logs, thatch and packed dirt. Smoke curls gently through a central hole in the roof, and the walls, made of wood and lined with bark, hold the heat like secrets. It's dim, smoky and completely magical, like a hidden room in the belly of the earth. Here's your historical fact. Pit houses, or semi-subterranean lodges, were used widely by tribes such as the Chinook, Nez Perce, Umatilla and others across the plateau and inland northwest. Built partly underground, these homes trapped geothermal warmth from the earth itself, offering natural insulation against both freezing winters and sweltering summers. Some were entered through the roof by the leches, while others had side tunnels acting as windbreaks and symbolic passageways between the worlds of the living and the spirits. And the quirky twist? Some pit houses had secondary storage chambers, small cooler rooms dug off the main space to keep dried fish, roots and berries preserved through the winter. Basically, built-in pantries beneath the frost line. A prehistoric walk-in fridge, if you will. Clever, quiet and cool, literally. You glance around and take in the details. The main room is wide, maybe 30 feet across, with a fire at the centre ringed by stones and low benches built along the perimeter. People sit cross-legged or reclined on mats and hides, basking in the radiant heat. The floor dips slightly in the centre, where smoke gathers before drifting up and out. A few dim oil lamps line the walls, their flames flickering gently in the draught. The sound in here is different too, subdued. There's a low hum to it, like the earth itself is talking. You hear the scrape of stone on bone, the quiet rhythm of weaving, the soft crackle of firewood. A child coughs. Someone stirs a pot of salmon stew. There's a rhythm to it, unrushed, grounded, cyclical. This shelter wasn't made for efficiency. It was made for survival with comfort. And yet, scholars can't agree on everything about these pit houses. Some believe they were used primarily by families. Others think entire communities. 20, 30 people shared one in colder months. There's also debate about the spiritual significance of the entrance location. Was the roof ladder purely practical, or did it represent a symbolic descent into the womb of the earth? A protective space during the dangerous season? Either way, You feel it. This place is different, calmer, quieter, ancient. You notice a carving on one of the roof beams, a fish, maybe a sturgeon drawn with bold lines, not decorative but sacred. In some cultures of this region, winter was not only a time of shelter, but of ceremony. The long dark nights were when stories were told, dances performed, ancestral knowledge passed down. And all of it happened in spaces like this, warm, smoky, and wrapped in the steady embrace of soil and fire. You shift to one of the benches and let the warmth soak into your spine. The fire doesn't roar, it pulses, a controlled burn, tended by someone with quiet hands who knows exactly when to add wood and when to let it breathe. You catch a glimpse of the roof's construction, massive beams forming a square or round shape above, lashed together with rawhide and sealed with layers of thatch, bark and earth. Snow lies thick on top, but you don't feel it. The weight only makes the house stronger, the insulation tighter. The cold can't find you down here. Someone offers you a woven basket. Inside, roasted camas bulbs, their sweetness caramelized by slow fire, and dried berries pressed into little cakes. You chew slowly. The flavors are deep and earthy, a far cry from the freeze-dried emergency snacks you'd probably bring if stranded in the wild. This is survival as cuisine. The hours pass softly, the fire glowing lower, as the room fills with the quiet rituals of evening. Blankets are drawn tighter, shoulders relax, stories begin. There's one about a trickster coyote stealing fire from the mountain, another about a flood that carried the people across the sky. The walls don't echo, they absorb, holding the words like they might be needed later. You realise, looking around, that this shelter is more than a defence against cold. It's a way of being, low to the ground, built with intention, deeply rooted in place and time. And like all the others, it doesn't shout its brilliance, it just works, quietly, faithfully. Eventually you climb back up the ladder and emerge into a world gone blue with dusk. Snowflakes drift lazily again, the wind momentarily still. Behind you, the pit house is nearly invisible, a slight rise in the ground, a thin curl of smoke. No towering roofs, no visible walls, just warmth, hidden in plain sight. You walk away, your feet crunching softly, toy, your body warmed from within, and somewhere beneath the earth, in a house carved from time and memory, another story begins. You wake to a crunch under your boots and a faint ache in your legs. The kind of ache that says you've been walking for days, through storms, over plains, down into hollows, up into mountains, and the cold, persistent and patient has followed you through it all. But you're still here, still warm, still walking, and that's more than most people could say if you dropped them into this landscape with nothing but a backpack and a vague idea about what insulation is. Today you're travelling southwest, not far, but into drier, rockier terrain. The air sharpens, grows thinner, and you can feel the elevation pressing against your lungs with each step. The snow is patchy now, hugging only the shadows and hollows, and the sun peeks through pale clouds with just enough warmth to make you squint. You're entering the high desert, cold as ever, but drier, meaner, and harder to read. Here, survival isn't about brute force, it's about sacred geometry, solar alignment, and building homes that think ahead. You crest a ridge and look down into a shallow basin, where a cluster of low, round dwellings hugs the ground like a group of sleeping animals. You approach the nearest one, its conical shape half buried in the earth, its outer walls made from packed mud, stones, and logs. A small wooden door faces east, warmed by the morning light. You've arrived at a Navajo hogan, and this one's built for winter. You step inside, ducking slightly, and find yourself wrapped in dry heat and a sudden silence so complete it feels sacred. The fire at the centre burns low, its smoke rising through a hole at the apex of the roof, just above where a central log, known as the life pole, anchors the structure. Around you, the space is circular, thick-walled, warm and still. This isn't just shelter, it's ceremony made livable. Here's your historical fact. The Navajo people, or Diné, built two types of hogans, one for summer, one for winter. The winter hogan was round, dome-shaped, and constructed from timber, mud and earth. The thick earthen covering provided insulation against the cold, while the central fire pit and smoke hole allowed heat to circulate evenly. And yes, the door always faced east, to greet the rising sun. A practical choice, sure, but also spiritual. Light equals life. The quirky twist, amours. These homes weren't just designed for temperature control, they were cosmologically aligned. The Hogan is considered a sacred space, built in harmony with the universe. Its circular shape reflects the sacred hoop of life. Its interior layout mirrors the path of the sun. Building one wasn't just carpentry, it was an act of reverence. And during winter, when survival balanced on a knife's edge, this spiritual symmetry wasn't an afterthought. It was the blueprint. You sit cross-legged near the fire, the warmth radiating from the packed earthen floor, and you begin to notice the little things. The walls hold their heat like slow-breathing lungs. The logs forming the frame are hand-cut, carefully placed at angles that have held for years, even decades. The earthen plaster, though cracked here and there, seals the wind out completely. This isn't slapdash construction, it's mastery without arrogance. And then there's the scent. Faint cedar smoke, sun-baked clay, and something else, maybe juniper, or the remains of a sage smudge burned earlier in the day. You don't just feel warm, you feel cleansed, like the shelter is working on more than one level. You glance up at the smoke hole. Unlike the narrow chimney drafts in modern homes, this one feels alive. Smoke rises cleanly, pulled up by the shape of the dome and the subtle draft from the door. The air moves with intention. The entire structure breathes in a way that's so smooth you hardly notice it. No stuffy heat, no carbon monoxide headaches, just a clean, dry warmth that gets into your bones and stays there. But of course, not all scholars agree on how widespread winter hogans were. Some suggest that in extreme weather, families might use deeper, semi-subterranean shelters or even share communal housing. Others argue that the hogan itself was so well designed, it didn't need improvement. It just needed good wood, proper ceiling and consistent fire tending. The debate goes on, but what you feel now sitting here is proof enough that whatever this is, it works. It more than works. The family inside moves slowly. A grandmother stirs a pot of mutton stew, while a younger woman braids yucca fibres into cordage. A child runs a small carved wooden horse across the floor in slow circles, giggling to herself. Life here is grounded, rhythmic and quiet. No rushing, no interruption. The shelter holds space not just for the body but for the spirit. It's not just about not freezing to death. It's about living, remembering, teaching, sharing. Even during the deepest cold, someone offers you a strip of fry bread, warm from a cast iron pan near the fire. You take it gratefully, the taste rich and grounding. Outside the air may be brutal, but in here you'd never know. The wind has been reduced to a whisper, the cold to a memory. You lean back, belly warm, mind slow, and realise this space doesn't want anything from you. It just wants you to be. You reach out and touch the wall, pressing your fingers into the dried earth. It's cool to the touch, but solid, comforting, like the land itself came inside and offered you a place to rest. The materials here didn't come from a store. They were gathered, shaped and blessed. And maybe that's what gives this shelter its particular magic. It's not just designed for humans, it's designed with them. In partnership with nature, a conversation, not a conquest. Eventually, the fire dims, the smoke hole glows faintly with the last of the day's light. You stand, give a quiet nod of thanks, and step outside. The sun is setting, casting long shadows across the high desert. The hogan behind you blends into the earth, its rounded roof barely distinguishable from the slope it rests on. A quiet structure with quiet strength. Nothing flashy, nothing extra. Just warmth, alignment and shelter that speaks in the language of stars and stones. You walk on, the wind returning in soft gusts, the temperature dropping with each fading ray of sun, but your chest is warm, your hands are steady, and somewhere deep inside you carry a little of the hogan with you. Night falls fast in the high desert. One moment the sky is a pale orange bruise, the next it's ink black and stuffed with stars so sharp they look like they could slice open the silence. You walk by starlight now, the air turned crisp and metallic, and your footsteps echo with that strange winter quiet where everything feels distant but intimate at the same time. You've entered the ancestral territory of stone builders, fire tenders, and architects of gravity-defying cliffside homes. The cold hasn't relented, but you can feel something shifting, the sense that warmth doesn't always come from wood or hides or even fire. Sometimes it comes from stone. As you round a bend in the canyon, the ground drops suddenly, and you catch your breath. Tucked into the red sandstone walls, glowing faintly from the inside, is a structure that shouldn't make sense. Flat walls, sharp corners, multi-level design. It looks less like a shelter and more like something out of a dream or a myth. You've arrived at a Puebloan winter dwelling, and it's going to make everything you've seen so far feel, well, a little primitive. You find the narrow trail that winds up toward the cliff face, your boots scraping against ancient stone steps worn smooth by centuries of use. At the top, you pass through a small wooden door set into the rock, and the temperature drops instantly, then rises again as you step inside. The stone holds the chill, but within a few steps, you're enveloped in a warm, dry atmosphere. The walls are thick, sun-baked adobe or carefully fitted sandstone bricks, depending on the exact structure, and the hearth in the centre burns low and steady. It's a kiva, or ceremonial chamber, converted for winter shelter by ancestral Puebloans like the Hopi, Zuni, and the people of Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde. Here's your historical fact. These multi-story stone and adobe structures weren't just homes. They were part of vast complexes that included storage rooms, courtyards, towers, and kivas. In winter, the lower rooms, often partially subterranean, were the warmest and most used. The stone walls, thick and insulating, kept out the wind, while small fires and body heat were enough to make the rooms habitable, even comfortable, through the deepest cold. The quirky twist? Some of the walls were constructed with thermal mass in mind. During the day, even in winter, the sun would strike the southern-facing walls, warming the stone. At night, the walls would slowly release that heat, maintaining a more stable temperature inside. Ancient passive solar design, before anyone had ever said the words eco-friendly architecture. You lower yourself onto a bench carved into the wall and run your hands across the surface, stone-worn smooth, not just by tools, but by time, by bodies, by stories. The space is dark except for the firelight, but your eyes slowly adjust. Around you are the quiet remains of daily life. Woven baskets, clay pots, drying hatsu herbs hanging in little bundles, and a ladder leading down into an even deeper chamber. The air smells of smoke, earth, and stone warmed just enough to release its scent. There's a hush in here that feels different. Not just quiet, sacred. Puebloan dwellings weren't just homes. They were part of a world view. Each room, each opening, each directional alignment had meaning. And in winter, when the outside world threatened life itself, the interior space became more than shelter. It became the heart of existence, a place to gather, pray, teach, dream. Of course, not everyone agrees on how much of this space was used for practical living versus ceremonial use. Archaeologists still argue about whether families actually wintered in these kivas, or if they served as spiritual sanctuaries while daily life went on in the adjacent rooms. But evidence of cooking hearths, food storage, and even bedding suggests that, at the very least, the line between the sacred and the practical was often blurred, especially when staying alive was part of the ritual. You hear soft footsteps behind you. A woman enters carrying a clay bowl of stewed beans and squash, steam rising in elegant spirals. She places it near the fire, then settles across from you without a word. This isn't a place for chatter. It's a place for reflection. You both watch the fire for a long time, the silence stretching not awkwardly, but comfortably, like it was made to fit around your shoulders. You look up and notice how the room was built to breathe. Vents near the floor allow fresh air to enter, while the smoke hole above, often aligned with certain constellations, lets heat and smoke rise. Nothing is accidental. The airflow, the light angles, even the way shadows move across the floor. Every detail shows thought, purpose, and a commitment to living in partnership with the land. The fire cracks. A few sparks leap upward and vanish. The room seems to inhale with you, and for a moment you understand what it means to be inside the earth, not just beneath it. There's a difference. This isn't a bunker. It's not a cave. It's a woven space of human intention and natural harmony. Eventually you rise and climb the ladder back into the higher chamber. It's slightly cooler up here, but not unwelcoming. You're starting to feel the shape of Puebloan time, how warmth follows the sun, how light carves the hours, how fire is less about roaring heat and more about careful balance. Outside, the stars blaze overhead, reflected in the deep glass of your eyes. You make your way back down the cliff path, your body warmed, your mind quiet. The stone structures behind you stand eternal and unmoved, like the bones of the world refusing to yield to the weather. And maybe that's what these homes offer most. Not just protection, but permanence. A promise that winter might be long, but there is always somewhere solid to wait it out. Morning breaks reluctantly, you sense the kind of pale desert sunrise that doesn't bring much warmth, but at least confirms the world hasn't ended in the night. The sky is a soft grey blue, and the air is cold in a dry, humming way, like it's vibrating just below the level of sound. You shoulder your coat and step away from the pueblo and cliffside, heading southeast now, into lower elevations and softer landscapes, where winter behaves differently. It's still biting, still capable of taking toes and fingers if you're careless, but it's not loud. Here the cold seeps. It seeps into soil, into bone, into thought. You're headed into the ancient homelands of the Mississippian cultures, people who didn't just build shelters but have built civilizations, mounds, cities, roads, trade routes that stretched for thousands of miles. You wouldn't think of them as winter survivalists in the same way as tipi-dwelling hunters or igloo-building Arctic families, but make no mistake, winter came for them too, and they were ready. You follow a path that winds through trees grown sparse in winter, bare hickories and oaks standing like skeletons in the morning light. Eventually the trail opens onto a wide, snow-dusted plain, where massive earthen mounds rise from the ground like sleeping giants. They're oddly symmetrical, even under the weight of frost, and you feel something shift in your chest. These aren't homes, these are statements. You walk toward one of the larger mounds, and just below it, nestled against its base, you find the remains of a wattle and daub house, rebuilt by descendants perhaps, or preserved for teaching. It's rectangular, with walls made from a lattice of sticks coated in a mix of mud, clay and grass. The roof is steeply pitched, covered in thatch and earth, and snow clings to it like it was meant to be there. This is a Mississippian winter dwelling, and it's warm in ways you haven't yet experienced. You step inside and the shift is immediate. The walls insulate not just against cold, but against sound. The air is still, dry and faintly earthy, like clay after a rain. The fire pit in the centre glows low and steady, and above it, a carefully managed vent draws out the smoke in a slow spiral. The floor is slightly sunken, packed earth, ringed with smooth stones and lined with woven mats. Someone has laid out baskets of acorns, nuts, and dried persimmons near the wall. Here's your historical fact. The Mississippian peoples, including ancestors of today's Choctaw, Chickasaw and others, built permanent or semi-permanent homes using wattle and daub, a method surprisingly efficient at retaining heat in cold months. When sealed properly and roofed with thatch or bark, these homes could maintain interior temperatures well above freezing, even when the outside dipped into the teens or lower. They weren't just surviving. They were holding meetings, storing crops, raising kids, living. And here's the quirky detail. Some winter homes were dug partway into the earth, a hybrid between above-ground dwellings and pit houses. This gave them a thermal edge. The earth stayed a relatively stable temperature year-round, so digging even a few feet down helped regulate warmth and coolness naturally. Add in thick thatch and fire, and you've got a house that essentially thermostats itself, no electricity required. You sit on a reed mat near the fire, your hands stretched toward the flames, and watch how the people move, slowly, deliberately. There's no rush here. A man is chipping away at a chunk of chert, shaping a new tool. A woman sits with a child on her lap, teaching her how to grind dried corn into meal. Another person, maybe a teenager, is arranging firewood, careful not to pile it too high. The fire isn't a bonfire, it's precise, measured. A companion, not a beast. You notice how the walls seem to breathe slightly. The daub is cracked in places, but repaired with care. The sticks beneath form a woven pattern that echoes the river basket stacked in the corner. Everything here speaks of continuity, of shelter not just as architecture, but as inheritance. Skills passed down, not written down, and always updated, modified, rethought. Of course, archaeologists still argue about just how widespread winter-specific versions of these houses were. Some say the Mississippian people used the same structures year-round. Others suggest winter dwellings were more insulated, smaller, and built in tighter clusters for warmth. There's also ongoing debate about how the mounds themselves were used during winter, whether as sacred ground, lookouts, or symbols of authority when the world went cold and dark. But what's clear is this. These people were not unprepared. You reach out and touch the wall. The daub feels solid, yet warm, holding on to the sun from days ago perhaps. There's something incredibly human about it. No exotic materials, no dramatic shapes. Just local mud, local sticks. And the collective wisdom of people who knew what they were doing. One of the elders catches your eye and smiles. She's stirring a pot of hominy on a stone slab, and the smell of it, smoky, nutty and rich, sends a shiver of comfort down your spine. She motions for you to sit closer, and you do, letting the heat of the hearth and the smell of real food settle into your clothes. Outside, the wind rustles dry leaves, but in here, it's just firelight and breath. You begin to see how this kind of shelter wasn't just about surviving the season, it was about building for the long haul. The mounds outside, towering and still, weren't made in a week. They took generations. The houses below them weren't just temporary covers for families, they were part of a larger rhythm of life, aligned with the crops, chimneys, and the great wheel of the seasons. Eventually, you rise and step back outside. The sky has clouded over again, and the air tastes like snow, heavy and close. But you're not worried. You've seen how the people here lived when the rivers froze and the fields turned silver with frost, and it wasn't with fear, it was with patience, ingenuity, and an almost stubborn sense of calm. You walk past the mound once more and glance up at its rounded top. Even in winter, it seems alive, watchful. Maybe it's just dirt, or maybe it's something deeper. Either way, it feels like shelter, even now. Not a place to hide, but a place to remember what humans are capable of, even when the cold comes for everything. The snow is falling again, soft this time, like powdered sugar sifted lazily from a sky that's made peace with winter. It collects on your shoulders and melts slowly into your coat. Oh, yeah. But you don't feel the cold the way you used to. You've grown into it. Or maybe you've just been surrounded by enough good shelter that the cold no longer feels like an enemy. More like an old neighbour who occasionally yells too loud, but mostly minds their business. The land flattens now, stretching east and west in gentle rolling folds. You're moving into the interior west, where the winters sneak up on you, not in big dramatic storms, but in the way water freezes overnight, and the horizon hums with wind that you can't see but can feel in your teeth. Out here, trees are rarer. Not gone, just fewer and farther between. The wind doesn't have to dodge obstacles, it just sweeps across the basin plains like a broom made of knives. In this place, wood is precious, and the shelter game changes entirely. If you don't have logs, you get creative. You look down into a sagebrush-strewn draw and spot a scattering of small dome-like structures. They're low to the ground, conical and covered in a patchwork of hides and grasses, wickiups or brush shelters. And yes, they were used in winter too. You make your way down, crunching across a crust of old snow, and approach one of the dwellings. It looks deceptively fragile. Just a cone of bent poles, tied together at the top, and wrapped in overlapping layers of brush, bark, woven reeds, and hide. But you step inside and everything changes. It's quiet, still. The air is warm in that subtle body heat and coals kind of way. No big roaring fire here, just a small pit ringed with stones, barely more than a glowing bed of embers. The inside of the wickiup is dark and intimate, the ceiling low, the walls surprisingly well sealed. You feel like you're sitting inside the hollowed chest of a sleeping animal. Here's your historical fact. Tribes like the Shoshone, Ute, Goshute, and other indigenous peoples of the Great Basin and Rocky Mountain foothills built wickiups as flexible shelters that could be adapted for every season. In winter they were fortified, sometimes double-walled, with inner layers of hide or bark and outer layers of brush or thatch. The key wasn't brute strength, it was layering. A basic cone frame could become a stormproof shelter with just the right combination of materials and know-how. And now the quirky part. In some cases, snow itself was used as an outer layer. After the brush frame was covered in hides, a thin layer of snow would be allowed to drift against the sides, hardening into a natural insulator. Once again, winter was both the threat and the solution. The very thing trying to kill you could be reshaped into your shield. Classic indigenous engineering. You settle near the fire, sitting cross-legged on a layer of dried grass and sagebrush, and take in the details. The poles are from local saplings, willow perhaps, bent and lashed with cordage. The hides are stitched with care, overlapping like shingles. The brush matting is rough but effective, held down with stones around the base. Every gap is patched, every seam reinforced. You can hear the wind outside, but it doesn't get in, not even a whisper. There's a small family inside, 2 elders and a young girl who watches you with wide, quiet eyes. She's wrapping something in strips of rabbit fur, a pair of moccasins maybe, or mittens. Her movements are practiced, efficient. Next to her, A kettle sits in the coals, steaming gently. You can smell something rooty and savoury, maybe a stew of wild onions and game. This isn't survival like you see on TV, full of panic and dramatic music. This is survival as routine, calm, familiar, daily. You notice a narrow trench running along one side of the floor, a small cold trap dug to collect the coldest air and keep it from settling where people sleep. Just a few inches deep, but it changes everything. The space above it stays warmer. It's the kind of detail no one tells you about in books, but it matters. Every ounce of heat saved means more life preserved. Of course, not every scholar agrees on the winter use of wickiups. Some argue they were strictly warm weather shelters, with families moving into rock overhangs or dugout structures during the coldest months. Others believe that when modified and maintained carefully, wickiups could stand up to serious snow and wind, especially in lower elevations where winters, while cold, weren't consistently brutal. The truth, as always, likely varies by region, tribe, and century. But sitting here, feeling the warmth hold steady even as the outside wind howls, you start to suspect these homes have been underestimated. A flap of hide near the entrance moves, and a gust of wind sneaks in, sharp, dry, hungry. It chills your ankles for just a moment before the flap drops back, and the warmth reclaims the space like a blanket tugged back into place. You exhale slowly and look around. The wickiup isn't fancy. It won't impress architects, but it's got something most modern structures don't. Total obedience to the environment. It doesn't fight the wind, it dodges it. It doesn't crush the snow, it lets it help. It doesn't seal you off from the world, it weaves you into it. You're handed a piece of dried meat. Thin, chewy, gamey. Probably rabbit or sage grouse. You chew slowly, the flavour deep and wild, and your fingers warm over the small fire. The girl finally smiles. It's a quiet kind of triumph, like she knows what you're just now figuring out, that this little brush cone in the middle of nowhere is more than enough. Eventually you crawl out again. The snow's falling harder now, but it doesn't bother you. The landscape stretches wide, the sky low and silver, the wind still trying to earn your fear. But you're not afraid, not anymore. You've learned what a few bent poles and some layered bark can do, and backed by centuries of trial and wisdom. You've seen how people without nails or nails guns still built homes that held against ice, wind, and worse. And as you climb the ridge again, looking back at the little wickiup, you realise something strange. It already feels like home. Snow is falling in big lazy flakes now, the kind that don't rush to the ground but spiral slowly. Like they're taking the scenic route. The land has levelled out again, wide and open, but with a few scattered hills in the distance. You pause at the top of a rise and look around. There's nothing flashy out here. No towering pines, no dramatic cliffs, no mountain peaks stabbing the sky. Just soft rolling terrain dusted in white, and the kind of wind that never stops moving. It hums low, constant, like a background thought you can't quite shake. This is the northern interior. A place where winter stretches its legs and settles in for a long, quiet stay. Here, you're walking into the homelands of tribes like the Flathead, Pont d'Oreille, and Salish, who knew these open lands inside and out. And just like in other places, they didn't wait for winter to surprise them. They built for it, not with bulk, not with flash, but with layering, smart site choices, and a kind of weather intuition you couldn't fake even if you wanted to. You spot the structure from a distance, low, round, and half blended into the hillside. It's clearly a winter lodge, built for practicality, not pageantry. You move closer and see its bones, a wide frame of bent wooden poles anchored into the earth, draped in heavy mats, thick bark slabs, and over that furs and hides lashed tightly with sinew or rawhide rope. Around the base, stones weigh down the coverings against the wind. It's not symmetrical, it's not polished, but it looks like it's weathered 100 storms and would be just fine with 100 more. You stoop through the entrance, which faces away from the prevailing wind, and step inside. The shift is instant. The wind goes silent, the cold backs off, and the dry, smoky warmth wraps around your shoulders like a thick woolen blanket. The fire at the centre is steady. No roaring flames, just glowing coals and the occasional crackle of resin from a pine log. This is a hide-covered winter lodge, and here's your historical fact. Across the interior northwest, Indigenous peoples designed these kinds of shelters to respond directly to their unpredictable, often harsh winters. While similar in shape to tipis or wickiups, These lodges weren't meant to be moved often during winter. Once set up in a protected area, usually a south-facing slope near water and with natural wind barriers, they became semi-permanent winter homes. Families would stockpile firewood, dried meat and tools here before the first frost ever landed. And the quirky twist, many of these lodges included built-in snow insulation by design. Not just from snow piling naturally, some families would intentionally pack snow around the base of the lodge to create an additional layer of insulation. That's right, they weaponized winter against itself. The snow helped trap warm air inside and block out wind drafts, much like how modern igloos work. A fluffy death trap turned into a heat-saving hero. You sit near the fire on a low platform built of logs, covered in woven rush mats and stacked with hides. The walls lean in around you, the ceiling sloping up into a tight point above the fire. Smoke curls lazily toward the vent, which is manually adjusted depending on the wind direction. Someone's already done the math. You can feel it. The air's just right. Not too stuffy, not too drafty. A system tweaked over centuries by trial, error and shared wisdom. There are signs of long-term use everywhere. A row of storage baskets tucked near the back wall. A carved rack where drying fish hang, their smoky scent mixing with the pinewood fire. In the corner, a pile of rabbit pelts, probably being stitched into mittens or lining for moccasins. And above you, suspended from the beams, bundles of herbs, some for flavour, some for medicine. Some, probably, for both. A woman stirs a pot hung just above the coals, its steam filling the space with the scent of something rich and root-heavy. You can't place it exactly, but it smells like it would keep you alive. You glance at the door and remember the wind, the cold, the emptiness of the outside world. In here, though, it feels full. The fire doesn't just warm, it anchors. Scholars still argue over the distinction between shelters like these and tipis or wickiups. Was it just regional naming? Were there architectural differences? Some say the term lodge suggests permanence, while wickiup implies seasonal use. Others point out that terminology often comes more from colonial observation than indigenous classification, and the true variety is far more complex. Either way, the functionality speaks for itself. You watch as a child tiptoes across the room, placing a small log into the fire with quiet ceremony. She doesn't speak. No one needs to tell her how important the fire is. It's the heart of the room, the clock, the light, the heat, the life. You touch the inside of the wall, hide over bark, bark over wood, wood supported by snow and stone, and it's soft where it needs to be, solid where it counts. A layered skin made by human hands to survive in a place where the air itself can kill. It doesn't look like much, but it holds warmth like a secret. As you sit back and sip something warm from a carved wooden cup, probably pine needle tea, tangy and medicinal, you start to understand the mindset that built this place. It wasn't about brute strength or flashy innovation. It was about noticing, adjusting, learning from the land. If the wind came from the west, you built your door to the east. If snow piled up, you used it. If the wood was scarce, you used smaller fires. Eventually, someone opens the flap and cold light seeps in. You brace for it, but it barely reaches you. The heat holds. You could live in here for months, and some did. You step outside again, the wind licking at your face like a reminder. The snow has thickened, the clouds sagging lower, and the smell of another storm rides the air. But behind you, the lodge stands calm and unbothered. It has nothing to prove. You walk on, warmed not just by fire, but by the idea that out here, where the cold tests everything, there were people who met it with nothing but saplings, hides and wisdom, and won. Snow crunches underfoot, but now it's not just a sound, it's a rhythm. You've walked long enough through these wintry worlds that you've started to match their pace. You no longer flinch at the cold breeze, or curse the drifting flakes that settle on your eyelashes. Instead, you notice them. The way snowflakes gather at the edges of branches like decorations, or how ice forms around a reed's base and catches the morning light just so. You're not fighting winter anymore. You're inside it, moving with it. And that means you're finally ready to learn one of the oldest, most effective survival strategies native peoples used. Not something you build, but something you wear. Today isn't about walls or roofs. It's about layers. You descend into a wide basin nestled between low hills. The wind's softer here, filtered by the terrain, and in the dip below, several shelters form a small winter camp, mostly teepees, some hide-covered wickiups, and one larger lodge built into a slope. Smoke curls gently from each. But what catches your eye aren't the structures. It's the people, bundled, yes, but not buried. They move easily, tend fires, carry water, check snares. No one's shivering, no one looks like they're barely making it. You step closer, drawn by the quiet efficiency of it all, and someone nods you over to a bench near a fire. A young man strips off a pair of mittens and lays them beside the flames. Fur on the inside, rawhide on the outside, stitched with sinew, and beaded at the cuff. Nothing fancy, just perfect. Here's your historical fact. Indigenous peoples across North America perfected layered clothing systems to stay warm in brutal winters, long before high-tech gear, thermal linings, or synthetic insulation. They used materials that were breathable, insulating, water-resistant and strategically combined. Think inner leggings made from tanned deerskin, outer wraps of buffalo hide, mittens lined with rabbit fur, snowshoes laced with rawhide, hoods made from the hollow fur of coyote or fox. Every piece had a function. Nothing was wasted. And when you got it right, your own body heat was all you needed to survive the cold. The quirky twist? 2 layers of hide with the fur turned inward was warmer than modern fleece. This trick, fur-on-fur layering, created a heat trap. It was especially used in parkas and robes, and sometimes the hides came from 2 different animals, say buffalo and elk, to balance weight, flexibility and warmth. These garments were heavy, yes, but tailored for movement. You could hunt, ride, haul and build in them. They weren't sleeping bags, they were armour against the cold, soft, breathable, animal-born armour. You take a seat beside the fire and warm your hands. Nearby, a woman adjusts the layers on a young child, inner dress, outer wrap, fur-lined moccasins, all tied snug with strips of sinew and cloth. She doesn't do it in a rush. It's methodical. Every knot, every fold matters. And you realise something. Shelter didn't end at the lodge walls. It walked with you. It was what you wore. And footwear. That's its own kind of genius. Winter moccasins weren't just leather socks. They were multi-layered systems with thick soles made from rawhide or layered bark, often stuffed with moss, shredded bark, or even grass. The inner layer absorbed moisture from sweat, the outer repelled it. Some even had snow covers, removal wraps for deep conditions. There's a boy near the edge of the camp tying on snowshoes made from bent willow and rawhide lacing. They are lightweight and curved just right to float on the crust of the snow. Not clunky, not awkward, just efficient. Snowshoes weren't invented for fun. They were for hunting, travelling, surviving. Different tribes developed different styles, some long and narrow for the plains, some short and wide for deep powdery forests. You run a hand along your modern jacket and start to feel a little silly. Waterproof? Sure. Wind resistant? Maybe. But would it survive a week out here without a backup? Probably not. These people weren't wearing luxury. They were wearing legacy. Generations of observation woven into every thread, stitch and seam. Scholars have marvelled for years at how some tribes seemed underdressed by European standards, but still survived temperatures that would drop explorers in a heartbeat. They've written about the way layered leggings allowed movement but trapped heat, or how hooded parkas with long hems prevented body warmth from escaping. There's even debate about whether the breathable materials kept people healthier in winter than stiff wool-lined colonial coats, which trapped moisture and led to chills. Sometimes staying warm isn't about adding more, it's about adding smarter. The fire crackles beside you, and someone hands you a thick winter robe, buffalo hide lined with fur heavy in the best way. You drape it over your shoulders and immediately feel the difference. It's not just heat, it's weight, presence, a feeling like the cold has been kept just one layer away and it's not allowed in. You glance around at the camp. People are working, not frantically, just battle. They have warmth in their homes, yes, but also in their clothes, their hands, their movements. A woman tosses snow off a pile of stored firewood. A man sharpens a bone knife. 2 kids race each other to the stream, their fur hoods bouncing with every step. Eventually you stand and walk away from the fire, wrapped in the robe, boots crunching in the snow. The cold touches your cheeks, but nothing else. Your core is warm, your breath comes easy. You don't feel exposed, you feel prepared. And that's the real secret, isn't it? For these communities, winter wasn't a thing to fear. It was just another season to dress for, another moment to meet with the right materials, the right design, and a lot of knowledge passed hand to hand, one stitch at a time. As you walk across the basin, the sun dips behind the hills, and the stars blink into view. You don't speed up. You don't rush for shelter, because you're wearing it. You wake to a different kind of quiet, Not the hush of snow falling or the muffled stillness of a fire-warmed room. This quiet is vast, expansive. It stretches from horizon to horizon like a heavy wool blanket pressed flat against the earth. The sky is a pale grey dome, and beneath it, the land seems to hold its breath. No birds, no movement, just an endless silence that makes you feel small but not unwelcome. You're walking now through a long, open valley flanked by low hills, their sides brushed with frost and pockmarked with scrub. The snow is thin here, patchy, crusted and frozen into strange patterns by the wind. There are fewer trees, fewer signs of anything really, and that's the point. You've entered a region where the land itself becomes the shelter. In the distance, you spot it. A shallow dip in the earth, partially obscured by the dried grasses and a wind-blown drift of snow. It doesn't look like a shelter. It looks like a mistake in the landscape, a place the wind carved out and forgot to fill. But as you get closer, you see it for what it really is, a dugout winter camp low to the ground, wind-shielded and quietly brilliant. You drop to one knee and brush away snow from the entrance, just a narrow gap between two slabs of stone and a hide flap stretched taut across a wooden frame. You crawl inside and immediately the wind vanishes. You've stepped into a pocket of warmth created not by walls, but by earth. Here's your historical fact. Many indigenous communities across the interior West and High Plains took advantage of natural depressions, hillsides and bluffs to create semi-subterranean shelters, digging into the soil and using the land itself as insulation. Often these shelters were temporary or seasonal, used for winter hunting trips or when snowstorms made travel impossible. But some were carefully constructed with stone walls, earth roofs, and smoke vents, small masterpieces of energy efficiency disguised as holes in the ground. And here's your quirky twist. In particularly exposed areas, people would use fallen snowdrifts and even bison hides covered in earth to build makeshift snow berms around the shelter. The effect was a natural windbreak. Think of it like the 1500s version of a snow fort, but one that could keep a family alive until spring. In the right conditions, the snow actually reinforced the structure, like packing foam around a fragile item. Nature, again, used as its own defence. Inside the dugout, the air is still and earthy. The walls are made of packed clay and lined with stone slabs where available. The ceiling is low but stable, supported by wooden beams scavenged from the limited trees or driftwood found near rivers. It smells like smoke, sage and soil, like a place that's halfway between home and wilderness. A fire burns low in a central pit, and above it, a small opening carved into the roof lets the smoke escape, pulled by the natural draft created by the height difference between the entrance and the vent. You sit on a hide-covered bench carved from packed earth, feeling the warmth seep in from the ground and the fire. It's subtle, not like the full-bodied heat of a tipi or lodge, but it's constant. A slow exhale of warmth that doesn't fade, doesn't flicker. It's the warmth of the world below, not above. Someone passes you a clay cup filled with a hot drink, probably pine needle tea or something brewed from roots. You sip it slowly, the sharpness cutting through the chill that still clings to your fingertips. Around you there are signs of life, bundles of dried grass for sleeping, stone tools laid neatly near the entrance, a small cache of preserved meat tied high in a sling just beneath the ceiling. Space is limited, but every inch is used. You notice that the shelter is built facing away from the prevailing wind, tucked behind a natural rise that acts as a wall. There's no fancy carpentry here, no dramatic structures, but the placement is everything. The environment is not being conquered, it's being recruited. The wind is turned into a helper, the cold into a boundary, the earth into an insulator. Scholars have always debated how widely these kinds of shelters were used. Because they're dug into the ground, they're often missed in archaeological surveys, either eroded over time or hidden beneath layers of sediment. Some say they were emergency shelters. Others insist they were primary winter homes for nomadic bands during particularly harsh years. What's certain is that they were never random. Every contour of the land, every hill, every hollow was evaluated for its thermal potential. Modern campers might call it finding good cover. Indigenous peoples just called it living with the land. The fire crackles gently, throwing dancing shadows against the clay walls. A child nearby runs their hand across a drawing scratched into the wall. Simple lines, perhaps a buffalo or a wind pattern, or just a family mark. This place isn't just protection, it's memory. Experience etched into dirt. Eventually the elder in the corner stands and opens the flap, peeking outside. The wind has picked up, brushing snow sideways again. But he doesn't look concerned. This isn't his first winter. He nods once, satisfied, and lets the flap drop. You lean back against the cool wall and realise that warmth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it sits still and waits. The shelter doesn't need to impress you. It just needs to hold. When you step outside again, the world looks a little different. The snow drifts higher now, the wind sharper. But you know the rules. Keep low, keep laid. Use the land, don't fight it. You're not just walking across winter anymore, you're moving with it, sheltered by more than walls, sheltered by instinct. And as the dugout behind you disappears into the folds of snow and sage, you smile. That wasn't just a pit in the ground, that was brilliance in disguise. The cold isn't cruel tonight, it's just quiet. The kind of cold that drifts through the air like a soft thought. You're walking beneath a sky, stitched with stars, your breath trailing behind you in soft clouds, and the snow beneath your feet crunches with the rhythm of someone who has stopped rushing. Somewhere back along the trail, a dugout home still glows faintly beneath its snow-blanketed roof, holding heat like a whispered promise. But out here in the open, surrounded by moonlit frost, you're about to discover something deeper, something older than insulation or fire or animal skins. You're about to step into the warmth of people. Ahead, you see the flicker before you hear anything. A fire, then shadows, then voices, not loud but layered, talking, laughing, the occasional burst of a song you don't recognise. It's a winter gathering, a temporary camp built not just for survival but for togetherness. A small cluster of shelters, some tipis, some earth lodges, maybe even a wickiup or two, ringed around a communal fire. You walk in quietly and no one seems surprised to see you. You're just another person seeking warmth. Everyone's been there. And here's your historical fact. In many indigenous cultures across North America, winter wasn't just a time of hibernation. It was the season of storytelling, teaching, and deep community connection. The pace of life slowed. Travel decreased. Hunting was done more strategically. And people gathered, sometimes entire bands or extended families, to sit close, share food, tell stories, and keep each other alive in ways that went far beyond just fire and shelter. The quirky part? Some groups even had specific taboos about telling certain stories only during the winter months. Among the Cree, Ojibwe and Navajo, for example, stories involving trickster figures, creation myths, or ancestral teachings were reserved for winter. Why? Because winter was sacred. It was quiet enough to listen. The snow silenced the outside world so that the inner one could speak. You settle onto a hide near the fire, the orange light flickering against a circle of faces, some young, some old, some drawn with time, others with paint. There's food being passed, roasted meat, hot broth in carved bowls, dried berries softening in steam. You accept a bowl with a nod and warm your hands on its sides before taking a slow sip. It tastes like something that took hours, maybe days. That's how time works in the cold, it stretches and settles. Around you, the shelters breathe out puffs of smoke into the night sky. They hold their warmth well, but the fire here in the centre isn't just for heat. It's the village's heartbeat. People gather around it in shifts. A few are wrapping their feet in furs to head out for firewood. One man sharpens a bone blade. Two elders sit shoulder to shoulder, murmuring a story in a language you don't know but understand anyway. Every voice here adds to the warmth. There's no electricity, no lanterns, no generator humming in the background. And still, the place feels alive. The crackling fire, the clink of wooden ladles against pots, the rustle of hides, the rise and fall of voices. It all blends into a rhythm of shared warmth. You glance toward one of the shelters and see children piled together beneath a mound of blankets and furs, not because there's not enough space, but because that's how people stay warm together. Skin to skin, breath to breath, stories to dreams. In the coldest nights, that closeness isn't just emotional, it's tactical. Heat shared is heat preserved. You've seen that in every shelter so far, but here it's on full display. No one winters alone. Some anthropologists have written about this, how communal living among indigenous peoples was as much a survival mechanism as a cultural choice. In winter especially, large lodges housed extended families. Work was divided, responsibilities rotated, fire tenders kept the flames alive. Elders passed down oral traditions, children were watched by everyone, This wasn't nuclear family living, it was interwoven. And when the blizzards came, that web held. You listen as one of the elders leans into the firelight and begins a story. His voice is raspy but steady. You don't catch every word, but the rhythm is enough to pull you in. It's a tale about a raven, a frozen river, and a coyote with smoke in its eyes. You're not sure if it's a myth, a memory, or both. And it doesn't matter. Around the fire, the story lives as long as someone listens. Outside the firelight, the wind sighs through the trees, brushing snow from branches in soft flurries. But here in the circle, you're untouched. Not just warm, but protected. The kind of protected that comes from knowing you're not alone. Even the stars above seem less cold when you're surrounded by laughter and steam rising from shared bowls. A young woman begins to hum, the tune simple and haunting. Someone else joins in. A drum appears, not a big one, just a hand drum played low and steady. The rhythm matches your heartbeat before you even realize it. You close your eyes and listen. This isn't entertainment, it's insulation. Not from the cold, but from the loneliness winter tries to bring. Later, as the fire burns lower and people drift back to their shelters, someone lays another log on the coals. Not because they need more light or heat right now, but because someone will wake in the night, cold or thirsty or restless, and they'll need that fire to still be there. It's a small gesture. But that's how warmth works. Not all at once, but always in motion. You walk away from the camp slowly, the sound of the drum still echoing faintly in your ears. The stars feel closer now, and your steps feel lighter. You realise that the shelters weren't the only reason these people made it through winter. It was the fires they built between them. You keep walking, the snow crunching again beneath your feet. But now the silence doesn't feel empty. It feels full. The fire is still on your clothes. Not the flame itself, but its scent. The gentle smoke woven into the threads of your coat. The warmth lingering in the fabric. The memory of shared space still tucked beneath your skin. You walk beneath a dawn sky that's all pale silver, and the low golden smear of sunrise pushing its way above the hills. Your breath curls in the air, but you're not shivering. The cold is still here, sure, but it's softer now. You've figured out how to carry warmth with you, like a smuggled ember tucked deep inside your chest. Ahead, the trail curves through a grove of snow-laced trees, and tucked just off the path you spot a low dome-shaped structure, smoke rising in a lazy ribbon from the top. Another lodge. You step closer, expecting the familiar hush of a home, but something feels different. The air here is thicker, almost sacred. You can hear quiet movement inside, and the scent of cedar hits you immediately. Not burnt, not smouldering, fresh, astringent, clean. You duck down and crawl inside, and the heat hits you like a slow wave. Not just fire heat, steam heat. You're in a sweat lodge, and it's nothing like the other shelters you've visited. It's smaller, more enclosed. No sleeping platforms or cooking spaces. Just a circular chamber sealed tight, lined with hides and brush, and in the centre, a pit filled with glowing rocks. Someone ladles water over them, and the steam rises instantly, wrapping around you like breath from the earth itself. Here's your historical fact. In many indigenous cultures, sweat lodges were sacred places used for purification, ceremony, and healing, often led by spiritual leaders or elders. But in cold seasons, especially during long, isolating winters, they also served a practical role. They were a place to cleanse the body, warm chilled limbs, heal frostbite, and break the chill that no fire could quite reach. In that sense, the sweat lodge was part spiritual revival, part thermal therapy. And the quirky twist? In some northern communities, sweat lodges were used strategically before and after hunting trips, not just to prepare spiritually, but to help hunters adjust their body temperature before braving the cold. Think of it as ancient temperature training. Sweating out impurities and then cooling down gradually made the body more adaptable to the extreme weather swings of winter. Some even argue it helped prevent cold weather injuries. Science is still catching up to that one. The steam rolls through the lodge in thick clouds, and your skin begins to prickle with heat. You shrug off your coat, then your outer layers, and sit quietly on the woven mat provided to you. Around you are a few others, eyes closed, breathing slowly, focused inward. No one is speaking. The rocks crack softly, and water hisses as it hits them. The air is hot, moist, and alive. You've never felt this kind of warmth before. Fire is irradiating heat. This is penetrating. It gets into your muscles, into your lungs. The kind of warmth that feels like it's undoing 100 cold moments all at once. Your breath deepens, and with it you start to understand that this shelter is more than walls. It's more than heat. It's a moment carved out of the season. A pause, a reset. Outside, you know the snow still falls, the wind still claws at tree branches, but here, none of that matters. This lodge isn't for surviving, it's for returning to yourself, to your people, to the strength winter tries to sap from your bones. The elder across from you speaks softly now, words in a language you don't know but can feel anyway. There's a rhythm to them, and the words ride the steam like smoke on wind. You bow your head instinctively, not from understanding, but from respect. Then comes the cooling. The flap opens slightly. Just a breath of outside air brushing across your damp skin. You exhale and feel the contrast. Hot against cold, sweat against chill. Inner fire meeting winter wind. This is the part that matters too. That moment of balance. Shelter isn't just about walls. It's about transition. Knowing when to keep heat in and when to let it go. You leave the lodge slowly, blinking into the snowy morning. Your skin steams in the cold, but you don't feel cold. Not even a little. In fact, you feel more awake than you have in days. Your joints feel loose, your breath feels clean. The snow squeaks under your feet as you move back toward the trail, and the sun at last rises fully over the hills. The light hits your face, and for once it feels like a gift, not a tease. There's a lesson here, of course. All these shelters you've seen, tipis, earth lodges, pit houses, wiki-ups, dugouts, they're all built to preserve warmth. But this one, this sweat lodge, it's built to generate it. From within. No insulation, no windproofing, just hot stones, cold air, and the knowledge of when to let your body do what it already knows how to do. Scholars debate the origin of sweat lodges, who built the first one, which region used them most extensively, whether they were shared technology or developed independently across cultures. But everyone agrees on this. They are ancient, and they're intentional. The lodge is built low to the ground, circular, covered in thick hides or bark. Inside, everything is arranged for the ceremony. It's not improvisation. It's designed with purpose. You walk now with lighter steps. Your body is warm, yes, but something else has shifted too. Your mind is quieter. Your shoulders don't ache like they did before. You realise that shelter isn't always physical. Sometimes it's something you carry with you after the fire dies, after the lodge is behind you. It's in your lungs, your skin, your heartbeat, and as the wind rises again, tugging gently at your coat, you smile. Let it come, you're ready. The trail has all but vanished beneath the fresh snow, but your feet know where to go now. There's no need to search for markers or signs. You've been following the logic of survival long enough to trust the land itself. It tells you where the wind bites hardest, where the trees form a natural wall, where the snow drifts deep and where it stays thin. You walk like someone who has spent many nights near firelight, wrapped in stories, warmed by wisdom older than maps. And ahead, just cresting the low ridge of a pine-dappled slope, you catch a movement that makes your heart skip. Not a fire, not smoke, but something even better in this weather. A dog. It's shaggy, four-legged, trotting calmly through the snow like it was born from it. You pause, and sure enough, more appear. Half a dozen dogs, followed by a cluster of humans moving in tandem with their animals. They don't seem bothered by the cold. In fact, they look perfectly at home. You step closer, and someone waves you toward a circular camp, low to the ground, ringed with compact shelters, simple lodges covered in bark, hide, and thick layers of snow. But again, what draws your attention isn't the fire or the architecture. It's the dogs, curled into corners, pressed against legs, asleep in pairs, watching the fire like they invented it. Tonight, you're learning about a different kind of shelter, not made from sticks, earth, or snow, but from living, breathing, tail-wagging warmth. Animal companions. Here's your historical fact. Long before the first European ships scraped into North America, indigenous peoples had domesticated dogs, and in many regions, especially in colder climates, these animals were more than helpers. They were transportation, early warning systems, hunters, protectors, and heaters, that's right. In the dead of winter, it was common for people to sleep beside dogs inside their shelters, using the animal's body heat as a vital part of nighttime warmth. The quirky detail? There's archaeological evidence that some communities, particularly in the subarctic and plains regions, bred dogs not just for pulling sleds but for sleeping. The larger, thicker-coated ones were especially valuable during winter. They had jobs during the day, but at night they curled up alongside their humans under buffalo hides or inside lodge walls. This was shared survival, fur to skin, heartbeat to heartbeat. You sit near the fire and watch as a child lays down with her head nestled into the curve of a dog's side. The animal doesn't move, just lets out a soft sigh and rests its chin on the floor. 2 more dogs are pressed against the walls, soaking in the fire's heat and radiating it back into the lodge like low-level furnaces. It's not just sweet, it's strategic. Inside the shelter, warmth is a team effort. You glance around and see where dogs have been sleeping, not in corners, not away from the humans, but right in the middle near the fire, curled into bundles of fur and muscle. In some cases, they're draped across legs or even backs, like living blankets. This isn't a modern pet owner setup. There are no leashes, no crates. These animals are working partners, built into the structure of survival. The lodge was never meant to keep the cold out by itself. It was always meant to include warm bodies, human and canine, all sleeping close, cycling heat through shared space. You look at your own hands, calloused from walking, and wonder how many nights you've spent cold when a dog might have made all the difference. The science, by the way, agrees. The average medium-sized dog gives off about 100 to 200 BTUs of body heat. Multiply that by 3 or 4, that's enough to take a sub-zero shelter into tolerable territory, especially when combined with hides, embers, and a well-insulated structure. There's also something psychological here, emotional shelter. In the long, bleak stretches of winter, when the days are short and the wind never seems to sleep, having a dog beside you wasn't just practical, it was comforting. An early warning system against loneliness too. Of course, there's debate in scholarly circles about how widespread this kind of practice was. Some argued dogs were too valuable as hunters or haulers to waste on warming duties. Others point out that in cold regions like the Yukon, Arctic and Northern Plains, there are numerous ethnographic records describing dogs and humans sleeping side by side in every kind of shelter from tents to pit houses. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But what you can't argue with is what you're seeing now, a dog curled tightly around a child's feet while the snow falls silently outside and the fire burns low, but steady. Someone hands you a carved cup, hot broth, faintly gamey, spiced with something wild. You sip it slowly, and a dog pads over, sniffs the edge of your coat, then settles beside you without a sound. You feel the heat almost immediately, not just on your side, but in your chest. There's something about this arrangement that's so natural it makes your modern brain feel clunky. You think of thermostats, heating pads, electric blankets, and they all seem ridiculous. Here, all it took was a few dogs, some wisdom, and the understanding that we're not meant to survive alone. As the fire dies down, people begin to settle for the night. The shelters fill with soft movements, boots unlaced, cloaks folded, fire poked, and in every one, dogs are there. Not watching the door, not chasing squirrels, just being warm. You pull your coat around you and step outside. The stars are sharp above, the moon pale and full, the dog that settled next to you earlier follows, trotting quietly at your side. You stop and it stops, you breathe and it breathes. And suddenly the cold night doesn't feel so empty. This wasn't shelter built from wood or mud or reed mats. It was built from relationship, a living bond that didn't need blueprints, just trust, warmth and proximity. And as you walk off into the night, the dog still at your heels, you realise this might be the simplest shelter of all. You just needed to let something warm get close. Dawn finds you already awake. Sitting by the edge of a frozen creek, steam curling from a tin cup you didn't even realise you were still holding. Beside you, the dog from last night lies curled in a tight ball, tail wrapped around its nose, chest rising and falling like a steady drum. The fire back at the camp is a faint glow now, barely visible behind the brush, and the wind has picked up, just enough to bite, not enough to threaten. You've been through enough winters now to feel the difference. This kind of cold doesn't scare you anymore. It's just part of the conversation. And that's exactly what today's lesson is. Exchange. Not between you and the wind or the fire, but between communities. Because while Indigenous people built their shelters from the land around them, they also built them from ideas passed hand to hand, camp to camp, across thousands of miles and centuries of winters. You're about to step into the quiet, fascinating world of trade for winter tech. Because sometimes surviving a deadly season means knowing when to borrow brilliance. You walk east now, across a windswept plain broken only by the occasional scrub bush or stunted tree, and eventually stumble upon the edges of an old seasonal trade site. You'd miss it if you weren't paying attention. Just a few tumbled stone circles, faded trail depressions, and a scattering of tools, half swallowed by the snow. But this is where ideas were exchanged just as often as goods, and sometimes a shelter made hundreds of miles away found its way here, carried not on wheels but in memory. Here's your historical fact. Indigenous trade networks in North America were extensive, sophisticated, and incredibly old. Goods, materials, and technologies, including shelter innovations, were traded across vast regions long before European contact. Obsidian from the west made it to the plains. Wampum from the east showed up in the Mississippi Valley. And yes, ideas about shelter, clothing, and winter survival travelled too. A lodge built in the rocky foothills might borrow tricks from the Great Lakes. A hide tent frame from the subarctic could influence a desert camp. Nothing was static. Winter might isolate communities physically, but the innovations it demanded found their way outward, like ripples in a frozen pond. And the quirky twist: some materials were traded purely for their thermal properties. Birch bark, prized for its waterproof and insulating abilities, was carried from birch-rich areas into places where those trees didn't grow. High-fat dried fish and whale oil were shared among northern communities to boost caloric intake during the cold months, not just for food, but as lamp fuel in places like the Arctic, where light and warmth were tied together. Beaver pelts, known for their insulating fur, were used in lining shelters even in areas where beavers were scarce. If someone else had found a better way to keep warm, you didn't try to reinvent it, you traded for it. You enter what remains of a circular earth lodge, partially collapsed, its wood beams blackened by fire or time. The shape is familiar now, a central hearth, the remnants of a smoke hole above, the low benches lining the edge. But the construction materials seem different. The bark is of a type you haven't seen since you were far to the north. The stone here is smooth river rock, carried from miles away. Someone brought something special here long ago, and it worked well enough that people kept bringing it. In one corner of the lodge, buried beneath a few inches of packed snow, you find a bundle, old but preserved. Reed mats, tightly woven, stiff with age, likely used to line walls or seal gaps in winter. But those reeds don't grow here, not even close. Someone had to carry them on foot across winter terrain, because they made the shelter better. That's how seriously they took survival. You sit on the cold stone and imagine what the gatherings must have looked like. Camps pitched close, families trading not just goods, but techniques. How to patch a roof with hide in sub-zero temperatures, how to arrange a fire for maximum draft. How to turn porcupine quills into sewing needles that could pierce the thickest buffalo skin. The shelters of winter were never fixed in time. They evolved, shifted, travelled. And not everything that travelled was tangible. Some of it was knowledge, word of mouth, demonstration, apprenticeship. A lodge building technique picked up by one traveller might end up changing the winter survival strategy of a whole band 2 valleys over. Stories weren't just for the fireside. They were blueprints. You dig a little more and find a shard of pottery etched with a spiral, maybe decorative, maybe a marker. Smooth, carefully shaped. Not from here, and yet it was here, used, valued. Maybe even traded for a better wall patch or a warm place to sleep for a few nights. This place is full of ghosts, but they don't feel gone. They feel distributed. Their ideas still alive in the camps you've already visited and the ones you've yet to see. You think back to the hogans, the tipis, the pit houses, the birch bark wigwams. No two were alike, no one version had the full answer. But together, as a web of shared trial and error, they formed something close to a continent-wide solution to the impossible question. How do you survive winter in a place with no central heating, no glass windows, no emergency backup plan? You step out of the ruined lodge and into the wind. It kicks at your leg, Asbir. You barely feel it. You're layered right. You're walking right. You're thinking like someone who knows where warmth comes from. And part of that warmth, part of the shelter you've been building in your mind, comes not just from walls, but from relationships. Trade is a kind of shelter too. It's a decision that says, I've found something that works, and I want you to have it. You head out across the plain again, the snow crunching beneath your feet. In your mind, you're already tracing the paths of goods carried long ago. Bark from the northeast, obsidian from the mountains, hides from the plains, stories from everywhere. And as the wind howls again across the empty, snow-swept trade route, you feel the warmth of 1,000 unseen hands reaching across the miles to pass you what you need. You've been walking for hours, maybe more. Time bends in the cold, twisting around the crunch of your boots in the snow and the long shadows that creep across the drifts like spilled ink. The sky is that heavy slate grey that doesn't promise snow. It promises everything else: wind, chill, silence. But you're used to all of it now. Your body knows how to move through the cold without wasting energy. Your breath hangs steady, and somewhere beneath all those layers, you're actually warm. And that's good, because where you're headed, shelter doesn't come from anything you can touch. Not from lodge poles or buffalo hide, not from bark or stone. No, this next kind of shelter is about something harder to see, but just as essential. You're about to find out what happens when shelter becomes spiritual. You crest a low hill, the snow packed hard underfoot, and below you is a clearing, a wide open place surrounded by trees bent under the weight of snow. There's a fire ring at the centre, half covered in drift, and what looks like a set of worn paths radiating outward like the spokes of a wheel. You walk down slowly, the wind at your back now, and you feel it before you see it. This isn't a campsite, it's a sacred site, and not in the touristy, put a plaque on it kind of way. This place breathes. The trees don't just sway, they listen. The fire ring, though cold now, feels like it could light up with just a whisper. You pause at the edge and feel your pulse slow. You're not in a lodge, but you're sheltered just the same. Here's your historical fact. Across many indigenous nations, winter wasn't just a physical trial, it was a spiritual season, a time for retreat, reflection, and reconnection with the unseen world. Ceremonies often moved indoors into kivas, lodges, or sweat houses, but some were held outdoors in places like this, wrapped not in walls, but in meaning. In those moments, warmth came not from fire, but from ritual, community, and spirit. The quirky part? In some traditions, winter was believed to be a thinning of the veil between the physical and spiritual worlds. It was said the cold brought clarity, that the silence of snow made it easier to hear what you normally miss. So when someone sought guidance, they didn't always retreat to shelter. They sometimes stepped into places like this and waited, alone, listening, wrapped in nothing but belief and a few thick furs. Winter became a teacher. You sit at the edge of the fire ring, brushing away the snow with your gloved hand until the ash-black stones underneath are visible. They're smooth from use, stained with soot, and still holding on to memory. You close your eyes for a moment, and just like that, you can almost see it. Figures sitting in a circle, voices chanting low, breath rising in puffs into the night. Maybe the stars above were the same ones shining now, maybe not, doesn't matter. The ritual held the cold at bay then, and the memory of it does now. In the northern plains, winter ceremonies were often timed with celestial events, solstices, moon phases, the way certain stars lined up in the sky. Shelters were built in alignment with these patterns, their entrances facing east, their hearths placed precisely to catch the dawn's first light. Shelter became a compass, a living calendar that told people not just how to stay alive, but how to stay connected to each other, to their stories, to the land itself. Scholars, of course, have debated what this meant. Some interpret it purely as survival psychology, rituals to maintain morale during long, isolating months. Others argue for deeper cosmological systems, pointing out the consistency of structure placement, symbolism, and ceremonial timing across vast distances. Either way, the takeaway is this. For many, shelter wasn't just a place to keep the wind out, it was a space to invite the sacred in. You rise and begin to follow one of the snow-covered paths leading away from the fire ring. The trees form a quiet corridor, branches arching overhead like a cathedral made of bone and frost, and in the hush, your thoughts stretch out, soft and long. You think about how warmth isn't always fire, that sometimes it's understanding, presence, purpose. Further along the path, you come across a standing stone, half sunk into the snow. It's carved with simple lines, maybe a direction, maybe a story. You rest your hand on it, and it's cold, yes, but solid, grounded, like everything else here. It doesn't try to deny the cold, it just exists within it. Sacred doesn't mean soft. You remember the people you've met along this journey, the family who sealed the wind out with hides and smoke, the hunters who dug into the earth for warmth, the the dog curled around your side like a breathing blanket, the elder in the sweat lodge breathing out old stories into steam. All of them sheltering in different ways, all of them teaching you something that doesn't need walls to stick. You return to the fire ring before long, still cold, still silent, but somehow it feels warmer, like the weight of history is pressing the frost down into something softer. You sit again, your breath rising in a quiet plume, and you let it settle in. Sometimes shelter is knowing where to be when the world is frozen. You don't build anything today. No poles or bark or stone, but you leave with something just as strong. The understanding that shelter isn't just constructed, it's remembered, invoked, shared. That in the harshest seasons, what protects you might not be a roof at all, but a memory, a belief, a circle of stones holding heat long after the fire's gone out. As you rise and begin walking again, the wind shifts direction, brushing gently against your face. It no longer stings, it just moves. And you move with it, carrying the warmth of unseen things. The trees thin out behind you, and the sky opens up into one of those late winter afternoons where the light is so low and golden it feels like it's trying to apologise for all the cold. The snow crunches softly underfoot, less like a warning now and more like a soundtrack. You've gotten used to its rhythm, the creak, the shift, the muffled hush it wraps around everything. You're not chasing shelter anymore. Now you're walking with it, like an old friend whose language you finally understand. Up ahead, the land changes again, tilting gently upward into higher ground. You can see it before you reach it, low mounds beneath the snow, unnaturally regular, rising in long sloping lines. They look almost like ancient waves frozen in the earth, and they are. You're standing at the edge of an old burial mound site built by the ancestors of the Eastern Woodlands peoples, Mississippian, Adena, Hopewell, names that get thrown around in textbooks like chapters instead of living people. At first, you might wonder what burial mounds have to do with surviving winter. But that's the thing. When you've seen enough types of shelter, every stick-and-hide construction, every pit house, every firelit lodge, you start to understand that winter survival wasn't just physical, it was about legacy, about building in a way that didn't just last the season, but lasted the centuries. And here's your historical fact. Across the woodlands of what's now the eastern and midwestern United States, native peoples constructed mounds. Some for burial, yes, but others for ritual, for markers, for memory. And though they weren't shelters in the traditional sense, these mounds were anchors during the long winter months. They marked gathering spots, ceremonial locations, community centres. When the snow came and the rivers froze, the people didn't scatter. They came here, to the centre of their world. The quirky twist? Some mounds, especially those aligned with celestial events, functioned like seasonal clocks. The angle of the sun at solstice would fall across certain mound summits or align with carved markers placed hundreds of years before, which means some of these people were using the earth itself as a calendar, tracking not just when to plant or hunt, but when to gather, when to tell stories, when to shelter together. The mounds weren't just old dirt, they were messages in terrain. You climb one of the mounds slowly, your boots slipping slightly on the snowy slope. At the top the wind picks up, but it's not the sharp beat, it's sweeping. You can see for miles, forest to one side, a frozen river in the distance, and scattered through the trees, the faint outlines of what were once winter villages, cleared spaces, charcoal middens, post holes from long-gone lodges. This wasn't a city, it was a seasonal heartbeat. You kneel at the summit, your breath visible, your body warm beneath your layers, and you start to realise something. The people who built these places didn't just survive winters, they outlived them. Their ideas, their stories, their presence is still here, even if their shelters are not. The wood rots, the hides wear away, but the shape of the mound still rises. Still says, we were here. We knew how to stay warm. We knew how to stay alive. Scholars still argue over how exactly the mounds were used in winter. Were they inhabited? Probably not, but they were visited, celebrated, protected. Some were repaired even during snow season, the slopes cleared of ice, the paths maintained. Some winter lodges were even built within sight of major mounds, a reminder that shelter wasn't separate from identity, it was part of it. To live through the cold was to remember who you were. You sit there a little longer, and then you notice a row of stones just beneath the snow, laid in a curve, maybe marking a burial or a path. They have been here through hundreds of winters, unbothered. That's the thing about stone, it doesn't flinch. You walk down the mound and into the lowland, where the wind is calmer. The trees are close together here, tall, bare-trunked, their branches high and skeletal, and beneath them, sheltered by this old grove, you find another structure, low, broad, a longhouse half collapsed, but still recognisable. Its frame is curved, like a ship turned upside down, and bark still clings in places to the ribs of the roof. You step inside and feel it right away, that hush of interior air, that warmth held like breath in cupped hands. The walls are bark and woven mats, layered tight. The interior is sectioned off, communal spaces, family niches, storage, fire pits evenly spaced. Even now, in its broken state, the architecture is brilliant. This was Iroquoian winter shelter, used in cold regions from the Great Lakes to the St. Lawrence Valley. And it was designed not for survival, but for community. Multiple families lived inside one longhouse. Fireplaces were shared. Heat was trapped by the structure's long, low profile and thick bark walls. Food was stored in overhead platforms or buried beneath the floor in insulated pits. And life, real life, went on. The longhouse didn't just resist the cold, it outlasted it, as did the people. And many still do. You run your hand along a beam smoothed by years of touch and weather. It's not warm, but it's not cold either. It's balanced. That's what shelter is at its best, not flashy, not defiant, just steady. A place to hold your heat and your history at once. As the sun begins to dip behind the tree line, casting long blue shadows over the mounds, you step outside and pull your coat a little tighter. Not because you're cold, but because it feels like the respectful thing to do. Like you're still walking among people who know exactly how to build a home that can hold back the wind and hold up the sky. And as you move on, you start to think maybe the ultimate winter shelter isn't just something you crawl inside when the snow gets bad. Maybe it's something you carry forward. A memory, a skill, a story, a stone still standing at the top of a hill. The sky is dark now, but not empty. Stars glitter in clusters, unbothered by clouds or wind. As if the whole world has held its breath just long enough to let the cold settle without a fight. You've left the longhouse behind and are following a trail that's barely there. Just a worn groove in the snow that dips and rises gently across the land. Ahead, faint lantern light flickers from inside a shelter, but for once, you don't rush toward it. You slow your steps, because this last stop isn't about arriving. It's about remembering what you've seen, what you've walked through to get here. All around you, winter stretches wide, but you're not afraid of it anymore. You've seen how the Lakota once carried entire homes across frozen plains, how they packed warmth into tipis so tightly that snow on the outside actually made the inside warmer. You've stood inside a Navajo hogan and felt the silence of desert cold broken only by the pop of embers. You've crouched in snow-covered pit houses, laid in bark-walled lodges, steamed beside glowing stones in a sweat lodge and watched the wind flicker past while your body stayed dry and warm inside a shelter built with nothing but bent saplings and ancient instinct. And in every one of those places, you didn't just see clever construction or sharp engineering. You saw people, thoughtful, resourceful, stubbornly alive people who didn't just endure winter. They planned for it, designed around it, partnered with it. The snow never stood a chance. As you move closer to the light, a familiar scent catches in the air. Wood smoke, yes, but something richer. Sage, maybe, or cedar, a scent that lingers in stories long after the fire burns out. You duck into the shelter, and right away you know this one is different. It's a small, temporary teaching lodge, built not to withstand a season, but to hold a moment. Bark walls, fire in the centre, bundles of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling. A circle of seats. This is where knowledge lives, passed not with textbooks or scrolls, but through voice, through sharing. You take a seat, and around you the shadows lean in. There's no lecture, no ceremony, just a quiet moment and an elder's voice beginning to speak. Measured, warm, slow, like honey. They talk of winter, of course, of building with the wind in mind, of knowing where the shadows fall at noon, of reading the snow's texture like a story. They talk of how fire behaves in different lodges, how smoke can warn you of a gap in the wall before the cold does. They mention the best moss for insulation, the kind of bark that peels clean even in frost, the trick to sewing with tendon when your fingers are half frozen. But then the voice turns softer, deeper. Now it's not just survival tips. Now it's about what shelter means. Not just a place to live, but a place to belong. A place you can return to and feel something shift inside your chest. A place that remembers you. That holds your breath in the air long after you've left. Here's your final historical fact. Many indigenous cultures didn't separate survival knowledge from cultural knowledge. Shelter was sacred, not just because it kept out the cold, but because it was woven into identity. The shape of a lodge, the materials chosen, the stories told inside, all were part of a people's expression of self. You didn't just live in a house. You lived in a continuation of every person who had warmed themselves by the same design. And the quirky final twist? In some cultures, when someone passed away during the winter months, their body wasn't immediately buried. The earth was too frozen. Instead, they were wrapped with care and kept inside the lodge close to the fire, part of the family until the thaw. Death wasn't rushed. It was honoured. Even then, the shelter gave warmth, not just to the living, but to those in transition. A literal holding space between worlds. The elder's voice fades into the crackling of the fire. No big finish, no applause, just silence. And a warmth that's not just heat anymore. It's understanding. It's yours now. You step back outside into the night. The stars seem brighter. The cold seems thinner. And your body feels like it's wrapped not just in layers of hide and wool, but in all the things you've learned along the way. You know now how to build a wall that doesn't buckle in wind, how to dig into the ground when trees are scarce, how to use dogs for more than company, how to share warmth when the fire gets low. You walk one last time across the snow, your boots sure, your breath steady. And behind you all the shelters remain, hidden in the forests, buried in the earth, flickering in memory. They're not gone, they're waiting for the next storm. And now so are you. You've walked across an entire continent of winter wisdom. You've seen warmth made from sticks and songs, from sweat and stone, from bark and buffalo hide. You've watched people live where others would freeze, and the secret was never magic, it was attention. To the land, to the cold, to each other. Now the journey's over, but the warmth doesn't end here. So here you are, finally still. No more trudging through snowdrifts, no more ducking beneath hide flaps or brushing frost from your eyelashes. Just you now, resting, warm. Somewhere quiet where the cold can't quite reach, and where everything you've seen still lingers gently in the back of your mind. Maybe you're tucked into bed right now, wrapped in a blanket that's trying its best to be a buffalo robe. Maybe you've got a fan running for that soft background hum, or a nightlight casting shadows like stars on your ceiling. Wherever you are, just take a breath, deep in, slow out, let your muscles ease into the mattress or the couch or the back seat of your road trip car, wherever sleep is trying to catch up with you. You've walked a long way tonight, through icy plains and frozen forests, past lodges that whispered secrets and snow houses that shimmered under moonlight. You've learned how to line a wall with birch bark, how to make friends with fire, how to spot the kind of snow that helps more than it hurts. You've seen how a shelter can be dug from the earth or strung from saplings, how it can be made of dogs and stories and the warmth of breathing side by side. But more than anything, you've seen what it means to listen to winter, to adapt, to build not against the cold but with it, shaping homes that don't try to beat the season, they invite it in just enough to understand it. And now, as your eyes start to drift and your limbs grow heavy, maybe you're carrying something else too, not just historical facts and clever tricks for staying warm, but a quiet kind of respect for the people who lived these winters before you, who didn't have thermostats or space heaters or down jackets, but who had each other, and the land, and a deep understanding of how to stay not just alive, but connected. So rest easy tonight. Let the snow fall behind your eyelids. Let the fire crackle somewhere in the background of your dreams. You're wrapped in something ancient now, something earned. The shelter's already built. You're inside it. Sleep well, my friend.